Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto had the power of Dragon God and took Ophis as his mate. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Roar That Sundered Heaven. The world was dust and ruin. Naruto Uzumaki's arms were pinned wide, his body a macabre effigy impaled by black rods that pulsed with a power so alien it felt like it was actively negating his very existence. He could feel the Kyuubi thrashing against its seal, a caged storm of fury and hatred, but the rods held it at bay, draining not just his chakra, but his will. Below him, the crater that was once his home smoldered. The faces of his friends, what few he could see through the haze of pain and dust, were masks of despair. He had failed. He had arrived full of bravado, the student of the legendary Sannin, the master of sage mode. He had taken down 5 of the 6 bodies, a feat that should have been impossible. But the last one, the Deva Path, the one who called himself a god, had been too much. He had been captured, helpless, and now this god was demanding the one thing he couldn't give. Then, a flicker of movement. A flash of dark blue hair against the gray desolation. Hinata. No, get back, he choked out, the words tearing at his throat. She didn't listen. Hinata Hyuga, the timid, quiet girl who could barely meet his eyes, now stood between him and a monster who had leveled a village. Her stance was shaky, her knuckles white where she gripped them, but her eyes, those pale lavender eyes, held a fire he had never seen before. I will not let you touch Naruto-kun, she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. Pain, the orange-haired puppet with the rippled eyes of a dead god, tilted his head. And why would you throw your life away for him? Because, he is my inspiration, she began, and the words started to flow, a torrent of confession held back for a lifetime. He never gives up. He always stands up for what's right. His smile, it saved me. I'm not afraid to die protecting him, because I love him. The word struck Naruto harder than any physical blow. Love. In the midst of all this death and destruction, that one, simple word was the most shocking thing he had heard all day. It was a fragile, beautiful thing offered up in a world of monsters, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that pain was about to break it. Your love only breeds more pain, the Deva Path said, his tone utterly flat. He raised a hand. You will understand. Hinata, run. Naruto screamed, pulling against the rods with a strength born of pure panic. The Kyuubi's chakra flared, a desperate, violent surge, but it was like throwing a bucket of water against a dam. Pain made a gesture, a simple, dismissive push. Hinata was launched into the air, a broken doll, before crashing to the earth in a heap. She tried to rise, to push herself up, and pain descended upon her like a vulture. He drew one of the black rods from his sleeve. This is the end, he said. Almighty push. But then, something changed. The red chakra, so violent and hateful, began to falter. The bijou bomb flickered and died. The monstrous fox avatar surrounding Naruto wailed, not in fury, but in what sounded like fear. Inside the seal, the Kyuubi, the mighty 9-tailed fox, recoiled. An older, far more profound power was stirring in the depths of Naruto's soul, a presence that had been dormant for millennia. It had been sleeping peacefully within the Uzumaki bloodline, a divine spark passed from one generation to the next, waiting for a vessel with the will and the capacity to finally house it. Naruto's rage hadn't just broken the dam of the Kyuubi's seal, it had cracked the very foundation of his soul, and now, the true god within was waking up. What is this? The Kyuubi snarled inside the mindscape, its form flickering. This presence, it is not the sage. The spiraling black ink of the 4th Hokage's seal on Naruto's stomach stopped twisting. For a moment, it hung there, suspended. Then, with a flash of brilliant, blinding gold, it didn't just break. It was erased. The intricate calligraphy that had bound the most powerful of the tailed beasts was burned away, not by demonic chakra, but by a light so pure and so potent it felt like the dawn of creation itself. In its place, a new symbol etched itself onto Naruto's skin, a golden, serpentine dragon, coiled in the shape of an infinity symbol, its head biting its own tail. Outside, the transformation was cataclysmic. The malevolent red chakra evaporated, consumed by a wave of golden energy that erupted from Naruto's body. It was not a destructive blast. It was a pulse of pure, unadulterated life. The ground around him, churned to mud and stone, exploded with growth. Emerald grass shot up from the dirt. Flowers of every color bloomed in an instant, their petals unfurling in the golden light. The very air, thick with dust and the stench of death, became clean and sweet, filled with the scent of ozone and fresh earth. The wave expanded. 2 streets over, a Chunin clutched the stump of his arm, bleeding out against a piece of rubble. The golden light washed over him, and he gasped as he felt not heat, but a profound, cellular warmth. He watched, his eyes wide with disbelief, as muscle, sinew, and bone wove themselves back into existence from nothing. In seconds, his arm was whole again, not even a scar remaining. Across the ruined village, the scene repeated. The dying were revived. The injured were made whole. The dead could not be returned, their souls already passed on, but the lingering miasma of their suffering was cleansed, replaced by a feeling of profound peace. Kakashi, pinned under a pile of rock and fading fast, felt the light seep into him. The crushing weight on his chest vanished as the rocks turned to dust. His mangled body knitted itself back together. He pushed himself to his feet, staring at the epicenter of the golden supernova. Naruto, he breathed, his single visible eye reflecting the impossible light. Pain, the Deva path, was thrown back, not by force, but by the sheer pressure of the life-giving energy. It was anathema to his very being, a power derived from death and Rinnegan. He shielded his eyes, a flicker of something, confusion, perhaps even fear, crossing his stoic features for the first time. When the light finally subsided, Naruto was no longer pinned. The black rods had dissolved into motes of light, their profane energy utterly annihilated. He floated in the center of the impossible garden he had created, his feet inches from the ground. His whiskered cheeks were gone, his skin smooth. His hair, once a sun-kissed yellow, was now the color of spun gold, shimmering with an inner light. His eyes, once a vibrant blue, were now slitted reptilian pupils of pure gold, glowing with an ancient, fathomless wisdom. He was no longer wearing the tattered remains of his orange jumpsuit. Instead, he was garbed in simple, elegant white robes, tied with a golden sash. A serpentine, draconic creature made of pure golden light, ethereal and translucent, coiled around his body, its head resting over his shoulder, its snout nudging his cheek with an affection that spanned eons. It was not a separate entity, it was a manifestation of his own power, the echo of his true form. Naruto Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki, was gone. In his place stood something else. Something older. Something divine. He looked down at Hinata's still form. There was no rage on his face now. No grief. Only a deep, profound calm. He reached down, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. The golden light flowed from his fingertips, and the gruesome wound in her chest sealed itself. Her heart, which had been silent, gave a single, powerful beat. Then another. Her eyelids fluttered. He had not just healed her. He had rewritten the last few seconds of her existence, pulling her back from the very brink. Then, he turned his gaze to the Deva path. His voice, when he spoke, was not the brash shout of the boy he had been. It was a melodic baritone, resonating with a power that made the very air vibrate. You speak of pain, he said, the ethereal dragon around him hissing softly. You have wielded it as a tool, as a philosophy, as a justification. But you have never understood its source. Pain regained his composure, his Rinnegan swirling. And what would you know of it, monster? Naruto took a step forward, and the ground itself seemed to sigh in relief. I know that it is the cry of a world that has forgotten how to create. You have only learned to destroy. Shinra Tensei. Pain roared, thrusting his hands forward. A massive, invisible wave of repulsive force, powerful enough to obliterate a village, surged toward Naruto. Naruto didn't move to block it. He didn't brace himself. He simply raised one hand, his palm open. The wave of force struck his hand and stopped. It didn't explode. It didn't dissipate. It was simply held, frozen in space a foot from his palm, the air visibly warping around it. He could see the jutsu for what it was now, not some divine power, but a complex manipulation of gravitational and repulsive forces, all controlled by the chakra flowing from a single, distant source. He saw the threads. He saw the puppet master. With a soft clench of his fist, the Shinra Tensei collapsed in on itself, imploding with the sound of tinkling glass. Pain stared, his body rigid with shock. Impossible. Nothing is impossible, Naruto said, his golden eyes glowing brighter. Only misunderstood. He vanished. Not with a flicker of speed, but as if he had simply ceased to be in one place and begun to be in another. He reappeared directly in front of Pain, his hand resting on the puppet's chest. You are just an echo, Naruto whispered. He felt for the other 5 echoes, the other paths. He could feel their chakra signatures scattered around the battlefield, all linked, all hollow vessels animated by a soul fractured by grief. It is time you return to the source. His hand glowed. The Deva Path's body didn't explode or crumble. It began to unravel. The borrowed life force animating it was drawn out, spiraling into Naruto's palm like a river of pale light. Across the battlefield, the other 5 paths of pain convulsed simultaneously. The Azura path, locked in combat with a group of Jonin, fell to its knees as its soul was ripped from its mechanical shell. The Preta path, absorbing a fire jutsu, simply dissolved into a column of light. One by one, the vessels were emptied. The 6 streams of soul energy flowed into Naruto's hand, coalescing into a single, sorrowful sphere of light. He looked at it, his expression unreadable. It was a soul torn into pieces, so steeped in pain it had forgotten its own name. With a gentle breath, he blew on the sphere, and it shot away, a comet of pale light streaking across the sky towards the land of rain. Naruto followed it, not by running, but by allowing the world to move around him. The landscape blurred into a stream of color, and in the space of a single heartbeat, he stood before a grotesque tree made of paper, hidden deep within the Amigakure forests. He phased through the paper, his form insubstantial, and found himself in a dark, cavernous space. There, hooked into a monstrous machine, sat a man so emaciated he was barely more than a skeleton draped in skin. His fiery red hair, the signature of the Uzumaki clan, was dull and lifeless. His back was pierced with the same black rods that had pinned Naruto. And in his eyes swirled the same Rinnegan, but they were filled with a universe of agony. Nagato. Konan stood beside him, her face a mask of terror and defiance as Naruto materialized before them. She moved to attack, paper shuriken forming around her. Do not, Naruto said, and the single command had the force of a physical blow. She froze, unable to move, unable to even think of disobeying. The sheer weight of his presence was suffocating. The sphere of soul energy that Naruto had sent flew into the room and slammed back into Nagato's chest. The man screamed, a raw, guttural sound, as the fractured pieces of his soul reunited within him. The memories, the pain, the guilt of everything he had done as the 6 paths, it all came crashing back at once. Naruto walked forward, his golden eyes boring into Nagato's. He didn't speak of their shared master, Jiraiya. He didn't offer a lecture on the cycles of hatred. He didn't need to. He placed a hand on Nagato's forehead. And he showed him. He didn't just project his own memories. He projected the raw, unfiltered feeling of his entire life. The crushing loneliness of a pariah child. The sting of every hateful glare. The desperate yearning for a single friendly word. The joy of his first true bonds with Team 7. The anguish of Sasuke's betrayal. The pride of mastering the Rasengan. The agony of Jiraiya's death. And finally, the incandescent rage and despair of watching Hinata fall. He poured it all into Nagato's mind, a tidal wave of emotion, but it was all underscored by a single, unbreakable, indomitable theme. He had never, not once, given up. He had never chosen to inflict his pain on others. Nagato saw it all, felt it all, and his own broken philosophy crumbled to dust under the sheer weight of Naruto's truth. He saw his own path for what it was, a coward's shortcut, a child's tantrum on a global scale. His cycle of pain was just a pathetic imitation of the true suffering and resilience he was now experiencing. Tears, thick and black, streamed from Nagato's Rinnegan. You are. I am the answer you were looking for, Naruto said, his voice softening with a flicker of something that might have been pity. You wanted to bring peace through shared understanding. Then understand this. He let the vision fade, leaving Nagato trembling and sobbing in his mechanical throne. The emaciated man looked at his own hands, then at Conan, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrifying clarity. I was wrong, he whispered. Conan. I was so wrong. He looked back at Naruto, his gaze filled with a desperate need for redemption. There is one last thing I can do. To atone. Not for a new world, but for the one I broke. Naruto nodded slowly. He had not ordered it. He had not demanded it. He had simply shown the truth, and the truth had compelled the outcome. He watched as Nagato formed a final hand sign, the one he had seen the Deva path use on a much smaller scale. Geto, Rinne Tensei no Jutsu. A bright light erupted from Nagato's body. The king of hell effigy that appeared was not a harbinger of death, but of life. Souls, like green motes of light, flew from its mouth, streaking back towards Konoha. Back in the ruined village, Kakashi, Shizune, and all the others who had fallen in the initial assault gasped as life returned to their bodies. Nagato's red hair turned stark white, the last of his life force expended. His body slumped, the light in his Rinnegan fading forever. Conan caught him, tears streaming down her face. Naruto turned to leave. His work here was done. Wait! Conan cried out, her voice thick with grief but also awe. What are you? Naruto paused at the edge of the paper tree, the golden light of the outside world silhouetting his form. The ethereal dragon coiled tighter around him. I am Uzumaki Naruto, he said. And for the first time, he spoke his true title, the words tasting ancient and new on his tongue. And I am the will of this world made manifest. He stepped out, and the world reformed around him. He was back in Konoha. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the crater. The people he had saved were stirring, looking around in a daze, their gazes all eventually drawn to the golden figure standing in the center of the impossible garden. The power coursing through him was an ocean. He was a thimble trying to contain it. He could feel the spin of the planet, the pull of the moon, the life force of every living thing for 100 miles. He could feel the Kyuubi, now silent and cowed within him, not sealed, but simply, coexisting, a drop of hatred in an ocean of creation. The sheer sensory input was overwhelming. He swayed, a hand coming up to his temple. The ethereal dragon nuzzled him, a comforting, grounding presence. He needed to center himself. He needed to understand what he had become. Sakura and Kakashi were the first to reach him. Naruto, is that you? Sakura asked, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at him with a mixture of hope and terror. This was the boy she had grown up with, but he was also a being radiating power that made her very cells tremble. It's me, Sakura-chan, he said, offering a small, tired smile. The smile was his, but the voice was different. The golden eyes were different. Kakashi looked from Naruto to the fully healed Hinata, who was now being helped to her feet by Kiba and Shino, her face a mask of utter confusion and awe. What happened? The Kyuubi. The Kyuubi is a part of it, Naruto said, his gaze distant. But this is something else. Something older. He closed his eyes, trying to sort through the millennia of dormant memories that were now flooding his consciousness. Ryujin. The dragon god of creation. The sea. Life itself. It was too much. It was in this moment of vulnerability, of him trying to grasp the reins of his own soul, that the new threat emerged. It came not with a bang, but with the silent flicker of movement in the shadows. Secure the asset, a cold, emotionless voice commanded from the edge of the crater. 6 figures appeared, clad in the blank white masks and dark cloaks of Root. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency, fanning out to surround him. In their center stood a man Naruto recognized with a jolt of cold anger, Danzo Shimura, his arm in a sling, his one visible eye narrowed with avarice and calculation. Uzumaki Naruto, Danzo said, his voice like grinding stones. Your unique power is a priceless asset to Konoha. By my authority as acting Hokage, you will come with me for debriefing and containment. Containment. Not protection. Containment. Like a weapon to be locked away until it was needed. The old Naruto would have screamed, would have raged against the injustice. The new Naruto simply opened his golden eyes, and the temperature seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Your authority? Naruto asked, his voice deceptively soft. He is a threat, one of Danzo's men hissed, pointing at Kunai. That power is unstable. He must be controlled for the good of the village. Danzo nodded slightly. Precisely. Now, come quietly. Do not force us to pacify you. Kakashi stepped forward, his hand hovering over his Hitai-8. Danzo, stand down. You don't know what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I am dealing with, Kakashi, Danzo retorted. A Jinchuriki who has lost control. An ultimate weapon that must be brought to heel. Now, take him. The 6 Root Anbu blurred into action. They didn't use flashy jutsu. They were silent, efficient, aiming for pressure points, for vital areas, for a quick, brutal takedown. They moved like ghosts, their killing intent a palpable shroud. They never reached him. Naruto didn't move a muscle. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't even look at them. He just spoke a single word, a word infused with the nascent authority of a god who could command reality itself. Kneel. It was not a request. It was a law. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The 6 elite, emotionless assassins, men who had been surgically and psychologically stripped of their free will, froze mid-stride. Their bodies, betraying their indoctrination, seized up. An invisible, irresistible force slammed down upon them, not from above, but from within. It was their own bodies, their own nervous systems, their own souls, obeying a command higher than any they had ever known. With 6, synchronized, sickening crunches, their knees slammed into the hard-packed earth. Their arms were forced to their sides, their heads bowed. They trembled, not from cold, but from the sheer, terrifying effort of trying to fight an edict that had rewritten their own biology. They were conscious, they were aware, but they were utterly, humiliatingly paralyzed. They were statues of flesh, forced into a posture of worship. Danzo stumbled back, his one eye wide with genuine, undiluted fear. This wasn't a genjutsu. It wasn't a physical restraint. It was something far more fundamental. He was looking at a boy who had commanded his best soldiers to kneel, and the universe had simply agreed. Naruto finally turned his gaze to Danzo. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the ethereal dragon at his shoulder raising its head and fixing Danzo with a gaze that promised oblivion. You speak of Konoha's will, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. You, who lurk in the shadows. You, who manipulate from the dark. You, who would sacrifice your own comrades for a hollow definition of strength. He raised a hand, and Danzo flinched, but Naruto didn't attack. He pointed a finger towards the Hokage monument, where the faces of his predecessors were carved. Their will was to protect the people of this village, their family, Naruto declared, his voice rising, echoing across the crater for all to hear. The first Hokage's will was for peace and unity. The second's was for order and protection. The third's was for love and the next generation. My father's, he said, a flicker of Minato's face flashing in his mind's eye, a memory now fully unlocked, was to protect this village and the son he believed in. He lowered his hand and fixed Danzo with a final, damning stare. I am the culmination of their will. I am the son of the fourth Hokage. I am the student of Jiraiya. I am the savior of this village. I am Konoha's will. Not you. Each word was a hammer blow, stripping Danzo of his stolen authority, of his twisted justifications. The crowd of shinobi, of civilians, looked from the kneeling root agents to the golden figure of Naruto, and they did not see a monster. They saw a king. Danzo, for the first time in decades, was speechless. He was outmaneuvered, outclassed, and utterly terrified. He saw his ambition, his entire life's work, turning to ash before a power he could not comprehend, let alone control. Naruto turned his back on him, a dismissal more profound than any attack. The matter was closed. He looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars beginning to appear. The ocean of power within him was beginning to calm, the chaotic flood settling into deep, fathomless tides. He felt alone. More alone than ever before. He was no longer human, not truly. He was a bridge between what was and what could be. Who else in any world could possibly understand? It was as if the universe itself decided to answer his silent question. A strange pressure descended. It was different from his own. His was the pressure of infinite, vibrant life. This was the pressure of infinite, absolute presence. It was the feeling of a perfect void, a silence so profound it was a physical force. High above the village, the fabric of reality tore open. It wasn't a violent rip, but a smooth, silent incision, as if a razor had been drawn across the night sky. The tear did not reveal stars or darkness, but a shifting, chaotic non-space of kaleidoscopic color and crushing emptiness, the dimensional gap. From this tear, a figure descended, floating down as gently as a falling leaf. It was a girl. She looked no older than 12, with pale skin, long, dark hair, and pointed ears. She was dressed in a gothic Lolita-style outfit, all black lace and frills, a stark contrast to Naruto's radiant white. Her expression was utterly blank, her face a porcelain mask of perfect apathy. But her eyes were the oldest things Naruto had ever seen. They were black, depthless pools of obsidian that held not the light of stars, but the crushing weight of eternity. They were eyes that had watched galaxies be born and die, and had been unimpressed by both. She landed silently on the grass of Naruto's created garden, her feet making no sound. All eyes turned to her. Who was this? Another enemy? She ignored everyone. Her entire, ancient being was focused on one thing, Naruto. She tilted her head, her gaze analytical, as if she were observing a peculiar cosmic phenomenon. The overwhelming, life-giving aura radiating from him was a constant, thrumming hum against the perfect silence she embodied. It was a symphony in a library. It was a sun in a lightless void. She looked at him, the new dragon god of creation, the being of infinite life. And in a voice as flat and empty as the space between worlds, she spoke a single, critical word. Noisy. Chapter 2, Infinity and Creation. The word hung in the air, impossibly heavy. Noisy. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a judgment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same dispassionate finality one might use to state that the sky is blue or that stone is hard. For a moment, the entire crater, filled with hundreds of newly revived shinobi, was utterly silent, as if the girl's pronouncement had willed it so. Every eye was on her, this tiny, doll-like figure who had appeared from a tear in reality itself. Naruto did not move. The old him would have bristled, would have shouted back some retort about being proud of who he was. But the being he was now did not react, he perceived. With his new, draconic senses, he looked at the girl and saw something that made the Kyubi, a being of near-infinite chakra, seem like a flickering candle. He did not see a person. He saw a concept. He saw a living, breathing hole in the fabric of existence, a point of density so absolute that it warped the world around it. She was the color of a starless midnight sky, the feeling of the endless vacuum between galaxies. She was the mathematical certainty of infinity, given form and a preference for Gothic fashion. Her power wasn't something she used, it was something she was. Her very presence was a declaration that everything else was superfluous. And to her, he was the ultimate superfluity. His aura, the golden, life-giving energy that had just resurrected an army, was a roaring bonfire of creation in her perfectly silent universe. "You are loud," she stated again, taking a single, silent step toward him. Her black eyes, devoid of any light or emotion, were fixed on him. "Your existence is noise. It disrupts the silence." As she moved closer, the world around her began to change. The impossible garden that had sprung from Naruto's awakening started to wither. The vibrant emerald grass turned a sickly brown. The brilliantly colored flowers wilted, their petals curling and turning to dust. The very air grew thin and sterile, the sweet scent of life replaced by the cold, metallic tang of nothingness. It was not an attack, it was a passive effect of her proximity. She was a walking, breathing entropy field. Kakashi and the others felt it as a sudden, crushing despair. It was a cold that sank deeper than bone, a psychic pressure that whispered of utter pointlessness. Hope, joy, love, all the things they had just felt surge back into the world, were being muted, dampened, erased. "Get back!" Kakashi shouted, forcing himself to move. "Everyone, form a perimeter." The shinobi, trained to react, scrambled to obey, but their movements were sluggish, their chakra sluggish and difficult to call upon. It felt like trying to swim through tar. Naruto remained the epicenter of his own reality. As her aura of perfect nullity washed over his own golden aura of creation pushed back. It wasn't a conscious effort. It was an instinct, as fundamental as breathing. Where her presence said nothing, his replied with a defiant everything. A perfect sphere of vibrant life, about 20 feet in diameter, formed around him, a dome of reality holding back the tide of her silence. Inside the dome, the grass remained green, a single patch of defiant life in a growing circle of desolation. They were two equal, opposite, and absolute forces that had just met an immovable object. A perfect stalemate. "And you," Naruto said, his voice calm and steady, the melodic hum a stark contrast to the encroaching stillness. "You are quiet." He took a step toward her, closing the distance between them until he was standing just at the edge of his dome of life, only a few feet away. The ethereal, golden dragon coiled around his shoulders hissed, its form wavering slightly where his aura met hers, like heat haze on a summer road. The girl stopped. She tilted her head, a curious bird observing a phenomenon that defied its understanding of the world. "You should cease. Your noise is unnecessary." "Is it?" Naruto asked. He gestured to the stunned shinobi behind him, to the village that, while broken, was now filled with living people instead of corpses. "They seem to find it necessary. Life is noisy. It grows, it strives, it feels. That is its nature." "It is a flaw," she replied, her tone unchanged. "Silence is perfection. Flawless. Absolute. I existed in silence. Then, the noise began. Dragons, gods, devils. They filled my home with their pointless struggles." Naruto's golden eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in intense focus. The torrent of new memories and cosmic awareness in his mind finally provided a name, a context for the being before him. Ophis. The Ouroboros dragon. The infinite dragon god. A being born in the dimensional gap, the void between worlds, who had been driven from her home by the Great Red, the dragon of dreams. But he didn't just get facts. He got the feeling behind them. He looked into her black, empty eyes and saw not apathy, but an abyss of loneliness so profound it had calcified into a state of being. He, who had spent his entire childhood ostracized and alone, felt a sudden, shocking pang of kinship. His loneliness had been a small, painful thing, confined to a single village, a single lifetime. Hers was cosmic, spanning eons, encompassing all of existence. She wasn't a monster. She was a child who had lost her home and just wanted to go back to the quiet of her room. The dimensional gap, Naruto said, the words coming to him naturally. You want to go home. For the first time, a flicker of something registered in her obsidian eyes. It wasn't surprise, not exactly. It was more like the acknowledgement a scientist gives when an experiment yields an unexpected but correct result. Yes, she said. The Great Red is there now. He is powerful. Too noisy. I must remove him. I gather strength, allies, to achieve this. But you are a new noise. A very loud one. I came to see if I needed to remove you, too. The threat was delivered with all the menace of someone discussing the weather. To her, erasing a being who could level a continent was no different from sweeping a bit of dust from a tabletop. You could try, Naruto said, and it wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation to see reason. But our energies are opposite. We would not destroy each other. We would annihilate this entire plane of existence in the process. A pointless outcome for both of us. He could feel it. If he unleashed his full creative power against her full power of infinity, the resulting explosion of paradox would unmake reality for light years in every direction. It would be the loudest thing to ever happen. The ultimate irony. Ophis seemed to consider this. Her logic was absolute and flawless. She processed the data and came to the same conclusion. The outcome is inefficient. Exactly, Naruto said. So, instead of trying to erase my noise, why not let me show you a different kind of quiet? Ophis's expressionless face betrayed nothing, but her silence was a question. Naruto held up his left hand, palm facing the sky. He closed his eyes, concentrating. He was not just molding chakra. He was now a weaver of reality, and he was about to create his first masterpiece. He reached out with his senses, not for energy, but for the fundamental components of the world. He gathered motes of light, stray threads of spatial energy, and the lingering echoes of time. In his palm, a swirling vortex of golden light began to form. It was no bigger than a raisin, but infinitely more complex. He poured a concept into it, the idea of a garden. Then he added another, growth. And a third, peace. Finally, he took the concept of silence, not her absolute, empty silence, but the gentle, peaceful quiet of a secluded grove, and wove it into the construct. He began to build. Onlookers saw a miniature galaxy being born in his hand. They saw continents of light form and solidify. They saw tiny, shimmering rivers trace paths across the glowing surface. Then, with a final pulse of gold, the light solidified. Floating above his palm was a perfect sphere of crystal, about the size of a grapefruit. Inside it was not a swirling vortex, but a breathtakingly beautiful scene. A miniature garden, impossibly detailed. There was a lush green lawn, a weeping willow tree whose branches swayed in an unseen breeze, and a small, clear stream that flowed from nowhere and to nowhere, tiny, shimmering koi fish swimming in its currents. Flowers of silver and blue, which did not exist in the natural world, bloomed along the stream's banks. It was beautiful, but that was not the miracle. The miracle was what surrounded it. The crystal sphere was a boundary. A perfect conceptual barrier. Touch it, Naruto said softly. Ophis, who had been watching with an unnerving stillness, slowly raised a delicate hand. Her finger, pale and slender, reached out and pressed against the surface of the sphere. Where her finger touched, the world outside the sphere was still subject to her nullifying aura. The ground was brown and dead. But the crystal itself, and the perfect world within it, remained untouched. The grass inside was still green. The fish still swam. The flowers still bloomed. Her power, the absolute power of infinity, could not breach the barrier. The garden is real, Naruto explained, his voice low. The tree, the water, the life. But I have isolated it. I have wrapped it in a shell of causality that dictates no disturbance may enter. No sound. No external energy. No unwanted presence. It is a pocket of reality where the only thing that can exist is what is already there. A perfect, self-contained silence. He hadn't fought her silence. He had understood it, and created a version of it she could hold in her hands. Ophis's finger traced a line across the crystal sphere. Her black eyes were locked on the tiny, perfect world inside. For a full minute, she said nothing. The most powerful being many dimensions had ever known was completely captivated by a toy. Interesting, she finally breathed. The word was a bare whisper, but in the context of her eternal apathy, it was a thunderclap. It was the highest praise she was capable of giving. The noise, you can shape it. Control it. You made, quiet. I can, Naruto confirmed. My power is not just noise. It is creation. And creation requires control. It requires understanding. He gently closed his fingers around the sphere, then offered it to her. A gift. So you have a quiet place to visit, no matter how loud the world gets. Ophis looked from the sphere to his face. Her gaze was still analytical, but the cold, dismissive edge was gone. It had been replaced by a deep, profound curiosity. She took the crystal sphere from his hand, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, but it was like a circuit being completed. For an infinitesimal moment, infinity touched creation, and the universe held its breath. She held the sphere in both hands, cradling it like a precious jewel. I will observe you, she declared. It was not a request. This power is new. Your solution to the noise is not one I had considered. I'd like that, Naruto said, and he meant it. He looked at her, this ancient, lonely god in the form of a little girl, and he didn't feel fear. He felt a strange, unexpected sense of relief. He was not alone. Thousands of light years away, in a different plane of existence, a warning klaxon blared. Governor. The energy spike we detected is off the charts, a fallen angel with 4 black wings shouted, his fingers flying across a holographic console. Azazel, governor of the fallen angels and leader of the Grigori, took a long, slow sip of his coffee. He was in his primary research facility in the underworld, a sprawling cavern filled with arcane artifacts, divine machinery, and the husks of failed experiments. He put his mug down with a soft click and ambled over to the main viewing screen. Calm down, Tamil, he said, his voice a lazy drawl that belied the sharpness in his eyes. Panic leads to sloppy data. The screen was a swirling mess of energy readings and dimensional coordinates. All centered on a single, insignificant dot labeled Elemental Nations, Sector 7. But sir, look at these readings. Tamil insisted, pointing a trembling finger. We've had 2 major events in the last hour from that previously dormant sector. The first was a massive, uncontrolled spike in what we initially thought was senjutsu, but it was far purer. Life-affirming, almost. The second is Ophis. I have eyes, Azazel said, leaning closer. He tapped a command into the console, isolating the 2 energy signatures. One was a familiar, oppressive black, the flat, infinite line of Ophis's power. The other was a brilliant, shimmering gold that was constantly fluctuating, like a living flame. Her signature is unmistakable. But what in the name of the first seraph is that? He ran a diagnostic. The system cross-referenced the golden signature with every known energy type in their database. Divine power. Demonic energy. Draconic aura. Holy power. Tuki. Senjutsu. Negative. 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 Unknown. Unknown. It's not Draig or Albion, Azazel muttered, stroking his chin. Their signatures are tied to dominance and division. This is different. The profile is fundamentally creative. The system can't even classify it. It's like we've just detected a new primary color. And look at the interaction, Tamil said, his voice hushed with awe. They're not fighting. They're harmonizing. It's like a perfect cancellation. The dimensional stress is immense, but it's stable. It shouldn't be stable. Azazel's laid-back demeanor was gone, replaced by the intense focus of a scholar who had just stumbled upon a new law of physics. He had spent millennia studying sacred gears, gods, and dragons, mapping the very blueprint of power in their world. And now, a variable had appeared that threw all his equations into chaos. A power that could meet Ophis, the embodiment of infinity, and create a perfect stalemate. A power that felt good. Life-giving. That was the most terrifying part. Evil, he understood. Destruction, he could counter. But a power that felt like the universe's own immune system kicking into gear. That was something new. A new dragon god, he mused aloud. No, the reading isn't draconic in the way we know it. It's something older. Primordial. He looked at the location. A backwater world, barely on the supernatural map. How? He brought up a satellite view of the location, using magic to peer across the dimensions. The image was grainy, but it resolved enough to show a massive crater. In the center, a golden-haired figure stood before Ophis. Well, Azazel grinned, a spark of dangerous excitement in his eyes. It seems the game is about to get a whole lot more interesting. He turned away from the screen. Keep a close watch on that sector. Do not engage. Do not interfere. Just watch. I want to know everything about our mysterious golden boy. And for God's sake, make sure Valid doesn't find out about this. The last thing we need is him picking a fight with a sentient miracle. Back in Konoha, the oppressive silence receded as Ophis drew her aura back into herself, her attention wholly focused on the crystal sphere in her hands. The shinobi of Konoha collectively gasped, color returning to the world and strength returning to their limbs. The crisis, it seemed, was over. Naruto gave Ophis a small nod, a silent agreement passing between them. He then turned to face his friends, and the rest of his village. The golden light around him softened, his ethereal dragon companion fading slightly until it was just a faint, shimmering outline. He wanted to appear less intimidating. Kakashi was the first to approach, his single eye wide with 1,000 questions. Sakura was right behind him, her hands clasped over her heart, her expression a whirlwind of shock, relief, and confusion. Naruto. Kakashi started, then stopped. What could he even ask? What are you? Felt too accusatory. How did you do that? Felt impossibly small. It's okay, sensei, Naruto said, his voice gentle. He saw their fear, their awe, and it ached in a place deep inside him that was still human. I'm still me. Just, more. More. Sakura echoed, her voice trembling slightly. Naruto, you died. We all saw it. And then, a light. You healed everyone. You brought people back from the brink of death. You defeated that monster, Pain, like he was nothing. And then, her. She glanced nervously at Ophis, who was now sitting cross-legged on the grass, utterly engrossed in her new silent garden. It's complicated, Naruto admitted, running a hand through his now golden hair. It felt strange. When he hurt Hinata, something broke. But it wasn't just the Kyuubi's seal that broke. It was something else. Something that was always inside me, sleeping. He looked down at his hand, flexing his fingers. The power of the dragon god, Ryujin. The spirit of creation. It seems the Uzumaki clan were distant custodians of its essence, and my soul was the first one strong enough to awaken it. He spoke the words as if he were reciting a half-remembered dream, the knowledge flowing into his mind from a source he was only just beginning to understand. From the crowd, Hinata stepped forward, her cheeks flushed. She had been healed, brought back from death itself by the boy she loved, only to see him transform into a literal god. She bowed deeply. Naruto-kun, thank you. You saved everyone. Naruto smiled at her, a genuine, warm smile that was a perfect echo of the boy he used to be. The golden eyes softened, and for a moment, they almost looked blue again. You were the one who saved me, Hinata. You reminded me what I was fighting for. I just finished the job. His gaze swept over the crowd, over the shinobi and civilians who were staring at him as if he were the sun itself. He saw their hope, but he also saw their fear. And he saw Danzo, being helped to his feet by one of the few Foundation members not paralyzed, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Naruto knew, with crystal clarity, that things could never go back to the way they were. He was no longer just a shinobi of Konoha. He was a force of nature, and his very existence would reshape the political landscape of their world. He had a choice to make. He chose to be decisive. The threat of pain is over, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the crater. Nagato Uzumaki has atoned for his actions. The Akatsuki is broken. He looked towards the Hokage monument. But our village is still vulnerable. Tsunade Obachan is in a coma. We need leadership. His eyes found Danzo. The old warmonger flinched as Naruto's golden gaze pinned him in place. Danzo Shimura, Naruto said, his tone turning to ice. You are hereby stripped of your authority and your position on the council. Your organization, Root, is to be disbanded. Its members will be brought into the light and offered a place as true shinobi of Konoha, or they will be dealt with. You will submit to an interrogation by Ibiki Marino regarding your actions during this invasion and your conspiratorial history. This is not a request. The sheer audacity of the command stunned everyone. A genin, no matter how powerful, was declaring the fate of one of the village's most powerful elders. But no one argued. After seeing him command 6 Root Anbu to their knees with a single word, no one doubted he had the power to enforce his decree. Danzo's face purpled with rage. You have no right, I have every right, Naruto cut him off, his voice ringing with the authority he had claimed earlier. I am the son of the 4th Hokage. I am the hero who saved this village. And I am the one with the power to turn you to dust with a thought. Do not test me. He then turned to Kakashi. Kakashi-sensei. Until Tsunade Obachan awakens, or a new Hokage can be formally chosen by the Jonin Council and the feudal lord, you will act as the commander of Konoha's forces. Shikaku-san will advise you. Your first order of business is to organize the reconstruction and to see my will regarding Danzo carried out. Kakashi was stunned into silence. Him. Commander. He was a gifted shinobi, but a leader of the whole village. Yet, as he looked at Naruto, at the calm certainty in those golden eyes, he found himself nodding. It felt right. With the immediate political situation handled, Naruto felt a fraction of the tension leave him. He had laid the groundwork. Now, he needed to understand himself. He looked at Ophis, who hadn't moved. I'm going somewhere quiet to think, he told her. You can come, if you want. Ophis looked up from her crystal sphere. Your noise is less now. More controlled. I will come. Naruto nodded. He gave a final, reassuring look to Kakashi and Sakura, a silent promise that he would be back. Then, he placed a hand on Ophis's shoulder. The world did not blur. The air did not rush past. They simply ceased to be in the Konoha crater. They reappeared on the flat, stone head of the fourth Hokage's monument, overlooking the broken village as the last rays of sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Down below, they could already see Kakashi barking orders, Shikaku Nara at his side, the shinobi moving with a renewed sense of purpose. Naruto sat on the edge of the stone carving of his father's head, his legs dangling over the 500-foot drop. Ophis sat beside him, her small legs not even reaching the edge, the crystal sphere held securely in her lap. For a long time, they just sat in silence. It was a comfortable silence, a shared quiet between two beings who existed on a level no one else could reach. "This is better," Ophis said finally, her voice soft. "The noise is far away." "It's my home," Naruto said, his gaze on the flurry of activity below. "It's noisy and chaotic and full of people who make mistakes. But it's mine." He felt her stir beside him and turned to see her looking not at the village, but up at the sky. Her head was tilted, her black eyes narrowed at a specific point in the deepening twilight. "What is it?" Naruto asked. "A flaw," she said. "There." In the silence. Naruto followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing but the first evening stars. But then, focusing his own draconic senses, he saw it. It was tiny, almost invisible, like a mote of dust on a camera lens. But it wasn't dust. It was a sliver of perfect, absolute blackness. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a hole leading to a darker space. It was a patch of sky where the concept of light and space had simply ceased. Stars weren't blocked by it, in that tiny sliver of reality, the stars had never existed. It was a hairline fracture in the canvas of the world, a crack that leaked a profound and hungry nothingness. As he stared at it, Naruto felt a cold that had nothing to do with the evening air. It was a fundamental wrongness, an existential chill that whispered of an enemy not of flesh and blood, but of principle. Ophis felt it too. She held her crystal sphere a little tighter. "That is not my silence," she said, and for the first time, Naruto heard a trace of something other than apathy in her voice. A faint, ancient echo of revulsion. "My silence is peaceful. Empty. That is hungry. It wants to consume." The crack was no bigger than his thumbnail from this distance, but Naruto felt it was a greater threat than Madara, the Akatsuki, and all the wars of his world combined. It was a pinprick that heralded a plague. This was the true reason for his awakening, he realized. Not to stop pain, not to end a war. But to face this silent, creeping unraveling of everything. And looking at the strange, timeless girl beside him, he knew he wouldn't have to face it alone. The age of shinobi was ending. The age of gods and monsters was about to begin. And Naruto Uzumaki, the dragon god of creation, was standing right at the dawn of it. Chapter 3, The Devil's Chessboard. The days following the invasion were a blur of organized chaos. Under Kakashi's surprisingly effective command, guided by the razor-sharp intellect of Shikaku Nara, Konoha began to heal. The physical reconstruction was a monumental task, but the spiritual recovery was faster. The story of Naruto's transformation had spread like wildfire, a modern myth born in the heart of their greatest tragedy. He was no longer the outcast Jinchuriki, he was the golden dragon of Konoha, a protector deity who had descended in their darkest hour. The fear he had seen in their eyes was steadily being replaced by a deep, reverent awe. Naruto, for his part, kept a measured distance. He knew his presence was overwhelming, a constant, radiant pressure that set mortal nerves on edge. He spent most of his time in the quiet solitude of the Hokage monument, with Ophis as his silent, ever-present companion. He was an engine of unimaginable power learning its own mechanics. He practiced by accelerating the growth of the forests surrounding Konoha, his life-giving energy making the trees grow stronger and taller, their leaves a more vibrant green. He learned to contain his aura, to bank the roaring furnace of his power until it was a warm, pleasant glow. Ophis watched his every action with an unnerving focus. She would sit for hours, cradling her crystal garden, observing as he practiced. She never offered advice or asked many questions, but her presence was a constant. She seemed fascinated by the very concept of practice. For her, power was a static, absolute state. For him, it was a dynamic, flowing river he was learning to navigate. "Why do you mend the small things?" she asked one afternoon, her gaze following a bird with a broken wing that Naruto had healed with a simple touch. Naruto was sitting on the grass, mending a crack in the stone face of the first Hokage, his golden energy flowing like liquid solder into the fissure. "Because small things matter," he answered without looking up. "A world is just a collection of small things. If you can't care for a single bird, how can you care for a whole world?" Ophis tilted her head, processing the logic. "The devils do not care for small things," she stated. "They care for contracts, territory, and power. They are noisy in a structured way." Naruto's hands stilled. He had been so focused on his own world, his own power, that he had given little thought to the wider cosmology Ophis had introduced him to. Devils. Angels. Fallen angels. Other gods, other dragons. His new senses told him they were real, their influence a faint hum in the background radiation of the cosmos. "You said they were your allies," Naruto recalled. "The ones who would help you fight the Great Red." "They are tools," Ophis corrected, her tone flat. "The Cow's Brigade. A collection of ambitious and broken things. They seek to disrupt the balance. I promised them power in exchange for their help. They are inefficient. A new kind of noise. A political, structured noise." Naruto stood up, dusting off his white robes. He felt the tiny, hungry crack in reality, the sliver of the Void Sovereign's influence, and knew he couldn't afford to be ignorant of the larger board. If he was to protect his world, he needed to understand all the players. "Show me," he said. Ophis looked up at him. "Show you what?" "The devils. The noise. I want to understand their structure," he said, his golden eyes firm. "I want to see what you see." Ophis considered this. "Their central hub is in a place they call the underworld. A different dimension. It is very loud there." "Then that's where we'll go," Naruto stated, his decision absolute. He had learned more in the past few days from Ophis's simple, direct statements than from years in the academy. To understand, he had to experience. He felt for the faint, thrumming signatures of this other world. They were like distant radio stations, faint but discernible. Among them, he sensed a recurring pattern, a specific frequency of teleportation magic. It was a faint thread of energy, but to his divine senses, it was a glowing neon highway. "There's a gateway nearby," he murmured, his gaze turning towards the land of hot water. "A recurring signal. Someone is using it." "It is likely a devil of noble standing," Ophis said. "They use such portals to visit the human world for contracts." "Good," Naruto said, a plan forming in his mind. He wasn't going to knock politely. He was going to make an entrance. He needed to establish his position on this new chessboard from the very first move. He placed a hand on Ophis's shoulder. "Hold on." He focused on the energy signature of the teleportation circle, not as a destination, but as a path. He didn't just want to go to it, he wanted to hijack it. He felt the complex magical formula, the spatial coordinates, the energy matrix that powered it. To him, it was as simple as a child's drawing. With a thought, he bent the path, twisting the destination from a hot spring resort in the land of hot water to its point of origin. Then, he stepped through. In the grand hall of the castle of Lucifer, in the heart of Lilith, the capital city of the underworld, a critical meeting was underway. Surzex Lucifer, the strongest of the four great Satans, sat at the head of a massive, polished obsidian table. His crimson hair was a stark contrast to the dark, Gothic architecture of the room. At his side were the other three Satans, Seraphal Leviathan, her playful magical girl persona suppressed in favor of a serious, regal demeanor, Ajuka Beelzebub, his green hair tied back, his expression thoughtful and analytical, and Falbium Asmodeus, who appeared to be napping but was, as everyone knew, absorbing every detail. They were discussing the gravest threat to their society in centuries, the Chaos Brigade, the terrorist organization led by the infinite dragon god, Ophis. The latest reports from our intelligence division confirm Ophis has granted another high-tier Longinus user their blessing, Surzek said, his voice grave. Their numbers grow, and their attacks on our territories become more brazen. Brazen and foolish, a portly, pompous devil from the house of Astaroth boomed from further down the table. They are disorganized rabble, my lord. A show of force from our armies would crush them. A show of force that would invite Ophis herself onto the battlefield, Lord Astaroth, Ajuka countered calmly. An outcome I am certain none of us desires. Her power is absolute. Our only advantage is that she does not act directly. Sarah Fall, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the table, added, and her motivations are still unclear. She wants silence, which is a ridiculous goal. Sotan would never want something so boring. As the debate continued, a large, ornate teleportation circle on the far side of the hall began to glow. It was the personal circle of Lord Zekrom Bale, the elder statesman of Devil Society, returning from an observation mission in the human world. The crimson light intensified, the Bale crest flaring at its center. Then, the color shifted. The crimson light was instantly and completely overwhelmed by a brilliant, blinding gold. The Bale crest shattered like glass, replaced by the serpentine, draconic symbol Naruto now bore. The magical energy of the circle, designed and perfected over millennia, was hijacked, rewritten, and overpowered in less than a second. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an energy so potent and so alien that every devil in the room, from the lowest guard to Surzex himself, felt a primal, instinctual fear. It was not demonic. It was not holy. It was, other. From the heart of the golden light, two figures stepped out. The first was a tall, young man in pristine white robes, his golden hair and glowing, slitted eyes radiating an aura of serene, absolute authority. Around his shoulders, an ethereal dragon of pure light coiled, its gaze sweeping over the assembled devils with an intelligence that was both ancient and predatory. The second figure, however, was what caused the blood to drain from every face in the room. It was the small, gothic girl every one of them knew from grainy intelligence photos and terrifying legends. Ophis, the Ouroboros dragon. The leader of their greatest enemies. And she was standing calmly beside this unknown golden being. For a heartbeat, there was stunned silence. Then, chaos erupted. It's Ophis. An attack. In the heart of Lilith. Protect the Satans. Guards in ornate armor materialized, their weapons drawn. The nobles at the table leaped to their feet, their own demonic auras flaring. Lord Astaroth, ever the fool, was the first to act. Pride and terror warred on his face, and pride won. He would be the one to strike down the invaders in front of the four Satans. Insolent whelps. You dare defile this hall with your presence. Perish, he roared. A massive sphere of purple energy, the power of destruction unique to the highest class devils, coalesced in his hand. It was a blast powerful enough to vaporize a mountain. He hurled it directly at Naruto. Naruto didn't even flinch. He watched the sphere of destructive chaos fly toward him with a detached curiosity. The old him would have met it with a Rasengan. The new him saw it for what it was, a chaotic, unstable burst of raw energy, given form by a devil's will. It was a tantrum, nothing more. He raised a single hand, his palm open. The sphere of destruction, the ultimate expression of demonic power, did not explode. It did not get deflected. As it neared his hand, it began to unravel. The violent purple energy bled away, its chaotic nature soothed and dismantled on a fundamental level. The screaming roar of the attack dwindled to a faint hiss. Filaments of raw magic broke away, dissolving into harmless motes of sparkling, inert light, like fireflies in the night. In the space of 2 seconds, the mountain vaporizing attack was reduced to nothing, leaving behind only a faint shimmer in the air. The hall fell silent again, this time a silence born of pure, undiluted shock. Lord Astaroth stood with his hand outstretched, his mouth agape, his face pale. He had just thrown his ultimate attack, and the golden-eyed man hadn't even blinked. He had simply unmade it. Sirzex Lucifer was on his feet, his own crimson power of destruction coiling around him, not as a threat, but as a shield. But he didn't attack. He was the strongest devil, a being whose power was said to rival that of the original Lucifer. He could feel, with terrifying clarity, that the being before him was on a completely different plane of existence. Attacking him would be like a child throwing a rock at the sun. He did the only thing he could. He de-escalated. "Stand down," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. The guards froze. The nobles lowered their hands, their own auras sputtering out. Sirzex's gaze was fixed on Naruto, his crimson eyes wary but intelligent. "You have performed an impossible feat of spatial manipulation, and you travel with the Ouroboros dragon as if she were a traveling companion. You are clearly not a common enemy. State your name and your purpose here." Naruto's golden eyes met Sirzex's. He felt the immense power coiling within the crimson-haired devil, but it was a finite power. A deep lake, whereas Naruto was an endless ocean. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto," he said, his voice calm and resonant, easily filling the vast hall. "And this," he gestured to Ophis, "is my companion, Ophis. We are here to observe." The name meant nothing to them. But the casual way he spoke of Ophis, and the fact that she hadn't contradicted him, was a political earthquake. "Observe?" Ajuka Beelzebub spoke up, his sharp eyes analyzing every detail. "You storm the heart of our government, displaying power that defies classification, all to observe." "I am new to this wider world," Naruto stated simply. "My companion finds your society noisy. I wish to understand the nature of your noise. Its structure, its purpose." He looked around the hall, at the opulent decorations, the armed guards, the rigid hierarchy evident in the seating arrangement. "It seems a very deliberate noise." This was a conversation no one had ever expected to have. They were prepared for war, for terrorism, for assassins. They were not prepared for a cosmic entity arriving for a sociological study. While the Satans were trying to process this, a subtle, almost undetectable ripple passed through the air. A sliver of space, no larger than a kunai, warped behind Ophis. From it, a thin, black needle coated in a god-slaying poison, a specialty of the fallen hero faction within the Chaos Brigade, shot out, aimed directly at the back of her neck. It was a perfectly executed assassination attempt, silent, swift, and lethal. The attacker, a high-ranking rogue devil hidden by advanced stealth magic, was hoping to eliminate Ophis and curry favor with the Satans in one fell swoop, a desperate and foolish gamble. He never had a chance. The needle had traveled less than an inch before Naruto reacted. To the assembled devils, he didn't appear to move. One moment he was standing 10 feet away from Ophis, the next he was directly behind her, his hand outstretched. The needle was frozen in mid-air, a millimeter from its target, trapped in a bubble of distorted time. Naruto's expression, which had been calm and neutral, was now chillingly cold. The temperature in the hall plummeted. The golden aura around him sharpened, and the ethereal dragon at his shoulder let out a silent roar, its form becoming more solid, its eyes burning with cold fury. He glanced at the needle, then at a specific, empty point in the shadows near the ceiling. "A foolish choice," he said, his voice low and dangerous. With a flick of his wrist, the time stasis bubble shattered. He didn't just grab the assassin. He reached through space, his hand phasing through the fabric of reality, and plucked the would-be killer from his hiding spot. A devil in a dark, form-fitting combat suit appeared in Naruto's grasp, held aloft by the throat, his invisibility cloak flickering and dying. The devil's eyes were wide with terror, his legs kicking uselessly. Naruto didn't choke him. He didn't crush his throat. He did something far worse. He looked into the devil's eyes, and the devil screamed. It was a soul-tearing shriek of pure, undiluted terror. The other devils couldn't see what Naruto was doing, but they could feel it. He was pouring a fraction of his own cosmic awareness into the assassin's mind, the feeling of an eternal dragon god's wrath, the sheer, crushing weight of eons. The devil's mind shattered in an instant. His eyes rolled back in his head, and his body went limp. But Naruto wasn't finished. He held the now catatonic devil up for all to see. "Let me be clear," Naruto said, his voice a blade of ice that cut through the silence. He turned his chilling gaze from the broken assassin to Surzex. "She is with me." He then looked at Ophis, who was watching the scene with her usual blank expression. But Naruto could sense the faint, almost imperceptible flicker of surprise in her aura. No one had ever done this for her. Her allies in the Cow's Brigade were terrified of her, seeking to use her. Her enemies sought to destroy or seal her. But no one had ever, in her entire eternal existence, stood in front of her and offered unconditional protection. Naruto turned his gaze back to the assembled leadership of the devil world. "Anyone who targets her," he declared, his voice resonating with divine law, "anyone who threatens her, anyone who even thinks of harming her, will not just be killed. They will be erased from causality. It will be as if they were never born. Their past, present, and future will be rendered null. Their mark on history, on the memories of their loved ones, will vanish. They will become a perfect, complete nothing." He let the threat hang in the air, its implications more terrifying than any promise of simple death. Then, he opened his hand. The catatonic devil did not fall to the floor. He disintegrated into a cloud of fine gray dust, which then sublimated into nothingness, leaving not even a memory of his scent in the air. Naruto's golden eyes swept across the room one last time, meeting the gaze of every single devil. There was no defiance. Only fear and a newfound, profound respect. He had just demonstrated not only the power to protect, but the will to do so with an absoluteness that was terrifying. He turned back to Ophis, the cold fury in his eyes melting away, replaced by a simple, grounding calm. "Are you all right?" Ophis stared at him. Her infinite, timeless mind was processing a new, alien variable, protectiveness. Loyalty. She, the Ouroboros dragon, had always been the protector, the one others sought favor from. For the first time, the roles were reversed. A warmth, faint but undeniable, bloomed in the frozen void of her chest. It was a strange, novel sensation, and she found she did not dislike it. The attempt was illogical, she said, her voice still flat, but a subtle shift had occurred in her posture. She was standing a fraction of an inch closer to him now. "My own power would have negated the poison. It's the principle of the thing," Naruto said simply, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. He turned back to the stunned Saiyans. Surzex had his hand on his wife Graphia's shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance, but his eyes had not left Naruto. "Now," Naruto said, his tone returning to one of calm inquiry, as if he hadn't just erased a being from existence. "As I was saying, I wish to understand your noise. Please, continue your meeting. Do not mind us." The sheer, galling audacity of it was almost comical. He had hijacked their teleportation grid, stormed their throne room, weathered an ultimate attack without effort, thwarted an assassination, erased the assassin from time itself, and declared one of the single greatest threats to their existence as being under his personal protection. And now he wanted them to continue their high-level strategy meeting as if he were just a piece of furniture. Surzex Lucifer, for the first time since the Great War, had absolutely no idea what to do. He looked at Ajuka, who gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible shrug. He looked at Seraphol, who was staring at Naruto with wide, sparkling eyes, a dangerous mix of fear and starstruck admiration on her face. He let out a long, slow breath, his crimson aura receding completely. He was a king, and he knew when he was in the presence of a higher power. Antagonizing this being was not just foolish, it was suicidal for his entire race. The only path forward was diplomacy. "The meeting is adjourned," Surzex announced, his voice tight. He gave Naruto a regal, if strained, nod. "Lord Uzumaki. Perhaps a more private discussion is in order. You have raised a number of significant questions that demand our full attention." Naruto nodded. "That seems efficient." As Surzex gestured for Naruto and Ophis to follow him to a more private chamber, Ophis felt a new sensation. She was walking beside Naruto, through a hall filled with some of the most powerful beings in this dimension, all of whom feared her. But for the first time, she didn't feel like a solitary force of nature. She felt like part of a we. The silence she had always craved was the emptiness of being alone. The quiet she felt now, walking in the protective shadow of this strange, golden dragon, was entirely different. It was the quiet of safety. The quiet of companionship. And deep within her, in a part of her soul that had been dormant for longer than stars had existed, a thought flickered. His noise is not a disruption. It is a shield. A new variable had been introduced to her perfect, logical world. And she was curious to see how it would resolve. Chapter 4, The Dragon of Supremacy. The news did not spread like wildfire, it detonated. Within an hour of Naruto and Ophis's arrival in the underworld, every major faction in the supernatural world was reeling. The Grigori's observation network went into a frenzy. Heaven's divine sensors registered a power signature so potent and unallied that Michael, the acting head of the Seraphim, called an immediate, panicked council. But nowhere did the news hit harder than within the chaotic, fractured ranks of the Cow's Brigade. Ophis, their silent, godlike leader, had appeared in the heart of enemy territory. But she hadn't attacked. She had arrived with an unknown male, a golden being of unimaginable power, who had then declared her under his protection. To the various warlords, monsters, and fallen heroes who made up the brigade, this was not just confusing, it was an existential threat to their entire operation. Their power, their prestige, their very purpose was derived from Ophis's authority. If that authority was now shared, or worse, usurped, their delicate alliance of convenience would shatter. Deep within a hidden fortress dimension, a young man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes lounged on a throne made of black stone. His features were handsome, aristocratic, yet held a sharpness, a predatory edge that promised violence. This was Vala Lucifer, descendant of the original Devil King, wielder of the Divine Dividing, and the host of the Vanishing Dragon, Albion. He was the leader of his own faction within the Cow's Brigade and, arguably, its most powerful combatant. His life had a single, driving purpose, to find and defeat the strongest opponents in existence, chief among them his eternal rival, the Red Dragon Emperor, and the being who had usurped his ancestor's throne, Surzex Lucifer. One of his subordinates, a half-breed devil with the features of a cat, materialized before him in a swirl of black mist. "Vala-sama." "Kuroka," Valley acknowledged, not bothering to open his eyes. "You seem agitated. Did Biko lose his staff again?" "It's about Ophis," Kuroka said, her voice unusually tight. She quickly relayed the reports flooding in from their spies in Lilith. The appearance of the golden being. The effortless negation of a high-class devil's attack. The casual erasure of an assassin. The declaration of protection. Vala's eyes snapped open. The lazy arrogance vanished, replaced by an electrifying, predatory focus. The very air in the throne room grew thick with a pressure that had nothing to do with magic, it was the sheer, suffocating battle lust of a true-born fighter who has just caught the scent of the ultimate prey. "Weakling." The voice that echoed in Vala's mind was ancient, powerful, and filled with a draconic arrogance that dwarfed his own. It was the voice of Albion, the White Dragon Emperor, one of the two heavenly dragons. "Ophis has been tamed. By some unknown upstart. Impossible. She is the infinite. She cannot be controlled." He didn't control her, Vala thought back, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He defended her. There's a difference. A new player, Vale murmured aloud, standing from his throne. Golden hair, golden eyes, and a power that Surzex himself was unwilling to challenge. A power that Ophis, our source of infinite strength, seems to respect. This power signature. It is not on any record, Albion rumbled, a note of genuine confusion in his voice. It is not of God, nor of the Satans. It is not Drake's. It feels primordial. Like the very concept of creation given will. Vale's smile widened into a feral grin. All his life, he had sought a singular goal, to defeat Great Red, the dragon of dreams, the most powerful being in existence, to prove himself the true dragon of supremacy. But Great Red was a mindless beast, a cosmic phenomenon. A fight with him would be like punching a hurricane. This new being, however, he was different. He had a name. He had a will. He had chosen a side, however bizarre. He was a thinking, acting entity with power that could make even Ophis and Surzex pause. He was not a mindless beast. He was a true rival. Kuroka, Vale said, his voice alight with manic energy. Arthur. Lo Fei. Gather the team. We're going to the underworld. To attack? Kuroka asked, her tail twitching nervously. No, Vale said, his body already beginning to shimmer with a pale, white light as the power of his sacred gear activated. I'm going to introduce myself. I've been looking for a worthy opponent my entire life. Someone who could push me to my absolute limit and beyond. Someone who could finally answer the question of who is the strongest. A magnificent suit of white and blue draconic armor, sleek and powerful, began to materialize around him. The balance breaker. The armor of the White Dragon Emperor. And it seems, he finished, the helmet sealing with a hiss as gem-like wings of pure light spread behind him, that he has just delivered himself to my doorstep. In a secluded, opulent drawing room within Lucifer Castle, the tension was thick enough to be cut with a knife. Naruto and Ophis sat on a plush velvet sofa, while Surzex and his queen, the silver-haired Graphia Lucifuge, stood opposite them. Ajuka Beelzebub had joined them, his analytical gaze flitting between Naruto and Ophis, trying to deconstruct the puzzle they represented. So, you are from another world, Surzex summarized, processing Naruto's heavily abbreviated explanation. And this chakra you use allowed you to awaken the dormant spirit of a dragon god of creation? That's the short version, Naruto affirmed. He was taking a sip of the tea Graphia had served, his movements unnervingly graceful. The tea was a rare blend, brewed with water from the underworld's most mystical springs. He could taste not just the leaves, but the very life force of the water itself. It was interesting. Ophis, for her part, had ignored the tea completely. She was sitting beside Naruto, her crystal garden in her lap, her presence a silent, immovable fact. And your purpose in aligning with Ophis? Ajuka pressed, his intellect wrestling with the sheer illogical nature of the situation. Her goal is the destruction of the current world order to achieve silence. Your power is fundamentally creative. Your goals are diametrically opposed. Is that her goal? Naruto asked, placing his cup down. He glanced at Ophis. Or is her goal simply to go home? You've assumed her methods are her desire. You've never bothered to ask what she actually wants, have you? You've only seen her as a threat to be managed. The question struck the two Satans. It was true. Ophis had always been a conceptual threat, an abstract force of nature. No one had ever thought to simply talk to her. And what is it you want, Ophis? Surzex asked, turning his attention to the small girl. Ophis looked up from her sphere, her black eyes empty. I want to return to the dimensional gap. I want silence. There, you see. Ajuka said. To do that, she must defeat the Great Red. A battle between them would tear the fabric of multiple dimensions. It would be catastrophic. Only if they fight, Naruto countered calmly. There are other solutions to a problem besides brute force. I thought devils were supposed to be clever. Before Ijuka could retort, a wave of immense, arrogant power washed over the castle. It was a familiar pressure to Surzex and Ijuka, the signature of the vanishing dragon. Valley, Surzex breathed, his expression hardening. Of all the times for him to show up. The doors to the drawing room were blasted off their hinges, splintering into thousands of pieces. Standing in the doorway, wreathed in a brilliant white aura, was Valley Lucifer in his full balance breaker armor. The air crackled with his power, the pure, unadulterated desire for battle. Surzex Lucifer, Valley's voice, mechanically filtered through his helmet, boomed through the room. I trust you won't mind me borrowing your guest. His gaze was locked solely on Naruto. He ignored the two Satans. He ignored Ophis. To him, they were just part of the scenery. All that mattered was the golden figure on the sofa, the source of the new, intoxicating power he had sensed. Naruto looked up at the armored figure. He felt the power of the white dragon, Albion. It was a power based on a fascinating concept, division. The ability to have the power of an opponent and absorb it. A parasitic, dominant power. A power born from envy and rivalry. It was the conceptual opposite of his own self-generating, creative force. You must be the current White Dragon Emperor, Naruto said, his tone conversational, as if a 10-foot-tall demonic dragon warrior hadn't just kicked his door in. You have your ancestors' arrogance. Valor laughed, a sharp, metallic sound. And you have a power that doesn't belong in this world. I've been searching for the ultimate opponent. The Ouroboros dragon is infinite, but has no will to fight. The dragon of dreams is a mindless beast. But you have power, and you have will. I wish to measure my strength against yours. Surzex stepped forward, his crimson aura flaring. Valley, this is not the time or place, stay out of this, Satan, Valley spat, not even glancing at him. This is a conversation between dragons. He turned his full attention back to Naruto. Fight me. Prove that your power is worthy of the respect Ophis seems to be giving you. Or prove that you are just another pretender for me to crush on my way to the top. Naruto sighed, a soft, weary sound. He had come here for information, not a brawl. But he could feel the burning intensity of Vala's will. This wasn't something he could talk his way out of. Vala didn't want a debate, he wanted a test. A validation. To refuse would be seen as weakness, which would only invite more challenges down the line. Sometimes, the most efficient path was a demonstration. He stood up slowly. The ethereal dragon at his shoulder materialized more fully, its golden eyes fixing on Vala's armor with predatory intent. Very well, Naruto said. If a fight is what you need to understand, then I will grant you one. But not here. He glanced at the priceless artifacts and intricate architecture of the room. I'd rather not destroy my host's home. With a thought, he enveloped himself, Ophis, and Valley in a bubble of spatial energy. Surzex and Ijuka lunged forward to intervene, but it was too late. The world dissolved around them, and in the next instant, they were gone. They rematerialized in a vast, desolate wasteland within the underworld, a place reserved for raiding games and large-scale magical experiments. It was a barren expanse of rock and dust under a perpetually twilight sky. Vala looked around, impressed despite himself. Instantaneous, mass teleportation through a hostile domain. Not bad. Ophis, stay back, Naruto said, not taking his eyes off Valley. Ophis nodded and silently floated several hundred yards away, seating herself on a rock outcropping, an impartial observer to the coming clash. Are you ready? Valley asked, settling into a low, predatory stance. His white wings flared, shedding particles of light. I am, Naruto replied, his white robes billowing in a non-existent wind. He didn't power up. He didn't flare his aura. He just stood there, a point of perfect, golden calm in the desolate landscape. This apparent lack of preparation seemed to infuriate Valley more than any taunt. "Let's see how you handle this." Valley roared and shot forward, moving at a speed that tore the air apart. He crossed the half-mile distance between them in a fraction of a second, his fist cocked back, glowing with white energy. Just as his fist was about to connect, Naruto vanished. Valley's punch hit empty air, the shockwave of it carving a 10-mile-long trench in the ground behind where Naruto had stood. Valley spun around, his draconic senses searching. "Hiding? I thought you were a god." "I am not hiding," Naruto's voice came from directly above him. Valley looked up. Naruto was floating 100 feet in the air, his arms crossed, looking down at him with an unreadable expression. Valley snarled and shot upwards like a missile. As he closed the distance, a sound echoed across the battlefield, a metallic, imperious voice that was not Valley's. "Divide." A wave of white energy washed over Naruto. The effect was immediate. Naruto felt a significant portion of his accessible power being siphoned away, halved in an instant. It was a bizarre sensation, like a part of him being scooped out. The stolen power flowed into Valley, whose own aura flared even brighter. "Boost! I have your power now." Valley gloated, his speed increasing. "Let's see you handle your own strength." He threw a punch, but Naruto, even with his power halved, simply tilted his head, letting the blow skim past his ear. The force of the missed punch warped the air 4 yards. Naruto retaliated. He didn't throw a punch or a blast of energy. He pointed a single finger at Valley. A thin, golden beam of light, no thicker than a needle, shot out. Valley, brimming with stolen power and arrogance, tried to swat it away. The moment his gauntlet touched the beam, his eyes went wide inside his helmet. The beam wasn't a destructive force. It was a stream of pure, unadulterated information. It bypassed his armor, his magical defenses, and flowed directly into the systems of his sacred gear. DD divide. Error. Foreign concept detected. Analyzing. Creation. Life. Recalibrating. Failure. Failure. Albion's voice, usually so arrogant, was filled with panic. Naruto's power wasn't just energy to be divided. It was a concept. Trying to divide it was like trying to use a calculator to understand a poem. The divine dividing, a weapon that could drain gods, was choking on the sheer conceptual weight of Naruto's nature. Valley staggered back, clutching his chest, his armor flickering. What did you do?" "Your power steals," Naruto stated, his voice echoing in the wasteland. "Mine creates. They are incompatible. You tried to drain the ocean with a cup, but you found the water itself is rewriting the code of your cup." He raised his hand. "Now, let me show you what it means to create." The ground beneath Valley began to tremble. From the barren rock, dozens, then hundreds of creatures began to rise. They were dragons. Not flesh and blood, but magnificent constructs of stone and earth, their eyes glowing with golden light. They were extensions of Naruto's will, each one animated by a spark of his creative force. "An army?" Valley laughed, regaining his composure. "You think numbers will stop the vanishing dragon?" He flared his wings. "Fine. I'll just erase them all." Half dimension. A special ability of the divine dividing. A pocket reality was created around the stone dragons, designed to have the existence of everything within it until it faded to nothing. But as the field went up, the dragons simply glowed brighter. Naruto poured more of his energy into them, their forms healing and reinforcing faster than Valley's power could erase them. Valley watched in disbelief as his ultimate area of effect attack was rendered useless. "Strength isn't about the power you steal or the things you erase," Naruto said, his voice carrying over the roar of the stone dragons. "It's about what you create to protect what matters. It's about what you can build, not what you can break." He descended slowly, landing on the head of the largest stone dragon, which rose to meet him. He now stood level with the hovering valley, a king on a living throne. Vala's pride was wounded. His frustration boiled over into rage. "Don't lecture me," he screamed. He abandoned complex techniques and resorted to a sheer barrage of power, firing dozens of white energy blasts, each one powerful enough to be a finisher for a lesser being. The stone dragons moved to intercept them, but Naruto held up a hand, and they stopped. He would take this himself. He didn't block. He didn't dodge. He simply allowed the blasts to hit him. Each explosion of white energy washed over his body, and was absorbed. His golden aura didn't even flicker. The energy, stolen from him moments before, was simply rejoining its source. He was taking back what was his. "It is my power, Valley," Naruto said, his voice laced with a hint of pity. "You were only borrowing it. You cannot hurt me with myself." Valley stopped firing, his body trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the horrifying realization of the gap between them. He had used his ultimate techniques. He had boosted his power with Naruto's own. And nothing had worked. He had been so completely and utterly outclassed, it was as if he were a child fighting a seasoned grandmaster. "No." Valley whispered. "I am the descendant of Lucifer. The wielder of the vanishing dragon. I am the dragon of supremacy." With a final, desperate roar, he poured every last ounce of his remaining power into a single, ultimate technique. Compression divider. All the power he had stolen, all his own reserves, were compressed into a single point of annihilating white light at his chest. This was his final gamble, an attack that would leave him utterly drained, but was powerful enough to wound even a god. He shot forward, a living comet of white destruction. Naruto watched him come. He didn't prepare a counterattack. He simply opened his arms, an inviting, almost welcoming gesture. Just as Valley was about to slam into him, Naruto acted. He didn't attack Vala's body. He attacked his armor. With a series of precise, controlled gestures, he manipulated the very energy that held the balance breaker together. He didn't destroy it, he disassembled it. With a series of loud, metallic clicks, the armor broke apart. The helmet flew off in one direction. The chest plate in another. The gauntlets, the greaves, the wings, they all detached from Vala's body, stripped away piece by invisible, irresistible forces until they were left hovering in the air around him like a deconstructed model kit. Valley, now clad only in his combat suit, was left powerless and exposed, his ultimate attack fizzling into nothingness as its containment vessel was dismantled. He floated there, frozen in shock and disbelief, utterly defeated without a single physical blow having landed on him. Naruto floated towards him, stopping just before him. He reached out and gently tapped Vala's forehead. "You have great power, Vala Lucifer," Naruto said, his voice soft but firm. "But you are a slave to it. You let it define you. You seek validation from battle because you have nothing else. Find something to create. Something to protect. Then, you will understand true strength." He pushed off gently, leaving Valley hovering alone in the sky, surrounded by the pieces of his broken pride. The stone dragons crumbled back into the earth, the wasteland returning to its desolate silence. Naruto floated back over to the rock outcropping where Ophis was waiting. She looked from the defeated, motionless form of Valley back to Naruto, her head tilted. "Your noise is efficient," she stated. It was, for her, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Naruto looked at the dejected form of the White Dragon Emperor, a being feared across the dimensions, now looking like a lost child. He hadn't wanted to humiliate him, but to teach him. He had shown him that there was a power greater than destruction, a strength that didn't rely on tearing others down. "He'll be fine," Naruto said, more to himself than to Ophis. He just needed to lose. With that, he sat down beside her on the rock, the silence of the wasteland a welcome respite. He had established his dominance, not through brute force, but through absolute, undeniable control. The message would now be clear to all the noisy factions of this world: there was a new power on the board, and he did not play by their rules. Chapter 5, Echoes of the Void. The utter, comprehensive defeat of Valor. Lucifer sent a tremor of pure terror through the Chaos Brigade and a wave of stunned silence through the rest of the supernatural world. It wasn't just that he had lost, it was how he had lost. He hadn't been overpowered in a brutish contest of strength. He had been systematically and conceptually dismantled. His greatest weapon, the divine dividing, had been rendered a child's toy. His ultimate armor had been disassembled like a puzzle box. The new golden being, Uzumaki Naruto, hadn't just won a fight, he had delivered a lecture using overwhelming power as his teaching aid. For Valley, the experience was world-shattering. He and his team had retreated, but the White Dragon Emperor was uncharacteristically silent, the usual arrogant fire in his eyes banked to a smoldering ember of confusion. The fight had given him not the validation he sought, but a question he couldn't answer. What do you create? For Naruto, the victory was a necessity, not a pleasure. He had spent the next few days in the guarded hospitality of Surzek's Lucifer, who now treated him not as a threat or an anomaly, but as a visiting monarch of a kingdom no one had known existed. The private discussions had been fruitful. Naruto, with Ophis providing blunt, factual corrections, learned the intricate political dance of the three factions, angels, devils, and fallen angels, and their fragile peace. He learned of the God of the Bible's death in the Great War, an event that had left heaven weakened and the entire system brittle. He was a quick study. His divine consciousness absorbed and processed information with terrifying speed. He saw the flaws, the petty rivalries, the ancient grudges that kept this world perpetually on the brink of another war. It was, as Ophis had said, a very structured and very pointless noise. It was during one such discussion in Ajuka Beelzebub's personal research laboratory, a place of humming machinery and floating geometric equations, that the new, more insidious threat made itself known. A frantic, high-level alert suddenly blared through the lab, a shrill alarm that cut through the arcane hum. One of Ajuka's technicians, a devil with spectacles perched on his nose, stared at his console in horror. Lord Beelzebub. It's the Glaciolabla's territory. It's gone dark. Dark? Ajuka asked, instantly at the console. What do you mean dark? A communication blackout? Worse, my lord, the technician stammered, his hands trembling. It's everything. Magical sensors, life sign detectors, spatial monitors, it's all flatlining. It's not that we aren't getting a signal. It's that the signal we're getting is perfect zero. Nothing. The entire territory, 100 square miles of it, has just ceased to register. Naruto, who had been observing a fascinating contraption that manipulated probability, went still. That feeling, nothing. He looked at Ophis, who was perched on a stack of books, her crystal garden in her lap. Her head was tilted, and her black eyes were narrowed. The flaw is growing, she said, her voice a low whisper only he could hear. The Chaos Brigade? Surzek, who had been summoned by the alarm, asked as he entered the lab. Unlikely, Ajuka said, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Even their most powerful attacks leave a signature. Destruction, chaos, residual energy. This is a void. A complete absence of data. It's like a chunk of our dimension has been scooped out and replaced with nothing. Naruto walked over to the console, his golden eyes gazing at the map of the underworld. He saw the blinking red outline of the Glaciolabla's territory, a house known for its reclusive researchers and beast tamers. And at the center of the outlined area, he saw a single, black pixel on the map that was not rendering correctly. It was a hole in the data itself. He remembered the hairline crack in the sky above Konoha. This was the same feeling, magnified 1,000-fold. The hungry silence. It wasn't them, Naruto stated, his voice drawing the attention of everyone in the room. He pointed at the map. This is something else. Ophis and I have seen it before. You have? Serzex asked, his crimson eyes sharp with concern. A corruption, Ophis said, floating down from her perch to stand beside Naruto. She stared at the screen with an expression of deep, ancient distaste. My silence is peaceful. This is a hungry nothingness. It consumes. The weight of their combined statements fell on the room. This was not a known enemy. This was a new, existential threat. The territory is remote, Ajuka said, but we must investigate. I'll dispatch a reconnaissance squad. No, Naruto interrupted. Don't send your people. You don't know what you're dealing with. They won't come back. He looked at Ophis, a silent question passing between them. She gave a single, curt nod. They were the only ones equipped to face this. We'll go. Serzex hesitated. To allow these two beings of unimaginable power to wander into a volatile situation in his territory was a risk. But to send his own men against an enemy that even Ophis seemed wary of was a suicide mission. Be careful, was all he could say. Naruto didn't need a teleportation circle. He placed a hand on Ophis's shoulder, closed his eyes, and focused on the black hole in Ajuka's map. He wasn't targeting a location, he was targeting the anomaly itself. The world dissolved around them, and they stepped out of reality and into silence. They arrived at the edge of the Glaciolabla's territory. The line was not a gradual change. It was a stark, horrifying boundary. On one side, the twisted, crimson landscape of the underworld, with its strange flora and oppressive, magical atmosphere. On the other side, gray. It was a world leached of all color, all life, all meaning. The ground was a uniform, textureless gray. The twisted trees were still standing, but they were featureless gray statues, their leaves gray dust that didn't stir in the wind because there was no wind. The sky was a flat, empty gray ceiling. There was no sound. No smell. No energy. The very concepts that made up a place had been neatly and clinically erased. It wasn't destroyed. It was unmade. Naruto took a step across the boundary, and the sensation was profoundly disturbing. It was like stepping into a photograph, a two-dimensional representation of a place that had once been real. His own golden aura seemed muted here, his vibrant life force a solitary point of defiance in an endless sea of null. It's worse than I thought, he murmured, his voice sounding strangely loud in the oppressive stillness. It is wrong, Ophis stated. Her own infinite nature was a form of existence, absolute and eternal. This place was the antithesis of that. It was the proposal that existence itself should end. They walked deeper into the gray wasteland, their footsteps making no sound on the dusty ground. They passed the remains of what must have been a castle, its walls still standing but its form indistinct, like a memory fading to gray. They saw the shapes of devils, frozen in their last moments, their bodies now nothing more than gray, man-shaped statues of dust, their expressions of terror permanently etched into the nothingness. There's something in the center, Naruto said, his draconic senses straining against the null field. A focal point. The source of the corruption. They moved towards it, 2 points of vivid reality, one gold, one black, journeying through a world of gray. As they neared the center of the territory, they saw it. It was a beast, but the term felt inadequate. It stood on 4 legs, its form vaguely canine, but its body was not made of flesh or energy. It was made of the same shifting, hungry nothingness that had consumed the landscape. Its form was unstable. Constantly wavering like heat haze, its edges blurring into the gray backdrop. Its skin was a swirling vortex of pure black, and where its eyes should have been were 2 deeper pools of void that seemed to drink the very light. It was a creature of the void sovereign, a herald of Shunya, the silent hunger. A void hound. As they approached, the hound turned its featureless head toward them. It let out a sound that was not a roar or a growl, but a wave of pure anti-sound, a pulse of silence so profound that Naruto felt the air in his lungs try to vacate itself. Ophis, however, simply tilted her head. It tries to imitate me, she observed, completely unaffected. Let's see what it's made of, Naruto said, his expression grim. He raised a hand, and a compressed sphere of pure, golden life energy, a Rasengan refined by his new power, formed in his palm. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of overwhelming creation. He threw it. The golden sphere flew through the gray air, a miniature sun of hope. It struck the Void Hound square in the chest. And nothing happened. The Rasengan, a force that could carve mountains, simply vanished. It didn't explode. It was absorbed, consumed, unmade by the hound's very substance. The creature didn't even flinch. The hound retaliated. It opened its mouth, a tear in its form that led to the deeper void, and a beam of pure black nothingness shot out. Naruto instantly created a shield of golden energy, a complex lattice of creative force. The black beam struck it, and the shield began to corrode, its golden light being eaten away at the point of contact. Naruto poured more and more power into it, but it was like trying to patch a dam that was dissolving. My power alone isn't working, Naruto grunted, the shield beginning to crack. It's a pure nullification effect. Creation versus uncreation. We cancel each other out. Ophis floated forward, her black eyes narrowed. She raised a hand, and a sphere of her own power, a swirling ball of pure infinity, shot out and struck the hound. Like Naruto's attack, it had no effect. The hound's nothingness was finite, a localized corruption. Ophis's infinity was a conceptual absolute. It was like trying to use the concept of endlessness to erase a single empty cup. The logic didn't connect. Yours creates, mine is. Neither can erase it, Ophis stated, arriving at the same conclusion. It is a paradox. It negates creation, but it is not infinite, so it cannot be overwhelmed by my nature. Naruto's shield shattered, and he teleported them both back 100 yards as the black beam carved a deep, permanent scar of nothingness into the gray land. They were at an impasse. Their individual powers, absolute in their own right, were conceptually ineffective against this new enemy. Then we can't use them individually, Naruto said, a sudden spark of inspiration hitting him. An idea, born from the clash of their two natures. What happens if we don't try to cancel it out? What if we overwhelm it with a concept it can't process? He turned to Ophis. Your power is infinity. Mine is creation, life. What is infinite life? Ophis's eyes widened slightly, a microscopic shift that was the equivalent of a gasp. The concept was absurd. Life is, by its nature, finite. It is born, it lives, it dies. Infinity is the opposite. It has no beginning and no end. The combination was a logical impossibility. A beautiful, world-breaking contradiction. It would be, an absolute, she whispered. Exactly, Naruto grinned, the thrill of discovery overriding the danger. It can negate creation. It can't be affected by infinity. But can it handle the concept of infinite creation? Let's find out. He held out his hand, and a new Rasengan began to form. This one was different. It wasn't just a sphere of golden energy. It was a perfectly stable, placid ball of pure, conceptual life. It was the idea of growth, of birth, of striving, compressed into a single point. Ophis, your turn, he said. Don't attack it. Infuse it. Pour your concept into mine. The idea of endless. No beginning, no end. Just, more. Ophis stared at the sphere in his hand, then at him. This was true cooperation. Not just fighting side by side, but merging the very essence of their beings into a single, unified attack. It was an act of profound trust. She reached out, her small, pale hand touching the golden sphere. She didn't push. She didn't pour. She simply connected. The absolute, abstract concept of infinity flowed from her, not as energy, but as a philosophical principle. The Rasengan began to change. The placid golden sphere was shot through with veins of pure, starless black. The two colors didn't mix, they swirled together, a perfect, harmonious dance of gold and black, creation and infinity. The sphere began to hum, a sound that was both a single pure note and an infinite chorus. It pulsed with a power that made the gray world around them tremble. The Void Hound took a hesitant step back, a flicker of something that might have been instinctual fear appearing in its form for the first time. Naruto looked at Ophis, a fierce grin on his face. Together. She nodded. With a shared will, they thrust their hands forward. The sphere shot across the wasteland, no longer just a ball of energy, but a screaming declaration of a new, impossible law of physics. Genesis Rasengan. Naruto roared, giving the technique a name. The sphere of infinite life struck the Void Hound. There was no explosion. No sound. No light. There was only growth. At the point of impact, a single, green blade of grass sprouted from the hound's black, shifting form. Then another. Then 1,000. 1,000,000. In the space of a heartbeat, the Void Hound was consumed by a tidal wave of impossible, accelerated creation. Emerald grass, diamond-hard trees with leaves of silver, rivers of pure, liquid light, and flowers that bloomed and scattered stars as pollen erupted from its body. The hound's form, its very concept of nothingness, could not process the paradox. How can nothing give birth to infinite everything? It tried to negate the growth, but the growth was infinite. It tried to consume it, but it was being created faster than it could be unmade. The creature let out a final, silent scream as its essence was not destroyed, but forcibly, violently repurposed. The wave of creation did not stop. It erupted outwards from the dying hound, a tidal wave of vibrant, impossible life. The gray, featureless landscape was overwhelmed. The dead gray trees were consumed by the new, diamond-hard ones. The gray dust was replaced by lush, emerald grass. The oppressive, silent sky was shattered, replaced by a swirling nebula of gold and black, the new signature of their combined power. In less than a minute, the entire 100-square-mile territory of nullity had been transformed into a new, vibrant, and utterly alien ecosystem. It was a world born from their fused natures, a testament to their teamwork. Naruto and Ophis stood in the center of their creation, breathing heavily, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer exhilaration of it. They had found their weapon. They had found the answer. That, Naruto said with a breathless laugh, was noisy. Ophis looked at the impossible world they had made. It was chaotic, vibrant, and overflowing with a life that defied all logic. It should have been anathema to her. But it wasn't. Because she was a part of it. Her infinity gave it form. Her silence gave its chaos a foundation. It is, our noise, she said, and the corner of her mouth twitched in the barest hint of a smile. Just then, a small, black device on Naruto's wrist, a gift from Ajuka for communication, flickered to life. A holographic image of Azazel, the governor of the fallen angels, appeared. He had a grim look on his face. Naruto-kun, Ophis-chan, glad I can reach you, the fallen angel leader said, his usual lazy drawl gone. Surzex told me where you were headed. I've been digging through some pre-Great War Grigori archives, some really old, forbidden texts. I think I know what you're up against. He pulled up a digital image of a crumbling, ancient tablet. The script was archaic, predating modern angelic and demonic languages. It's a creation myth, Azazel explained, but a dark one. It speaks of a time before creation, which was not a void, but a perfect, sentient nothingness. A being, a concept, called Shunya. The silent hunger. It claims that our reality, our existence, is a flaw, a cancer growing in its perfect state of non-being. And it mentions its ancient enemies, the forces that imprisoned it at the dawn of time. He zoomed in on a single, recurring glyph on the tablet. It was a serpentine, coiling dragon. One of its jailers, Azazel said, his voice grim, was a being the texts call Ryujin. The dragon god of creation. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. Naruto looked around the vibrant, impossible world they had just created. This wasn't a random series of events. His awakening, the appearance of the void cracks, the heralds, it was all connected. An ancient war had just been rekindled, and he was standing on the front lines. He was not just a god. He was a jailer, and his prisoner was starting to break free. Chapter 6, The Red Dragon of the Battlefield. The new, impossible forest they had created was a place of vibrant, dangerous beauty. It hummed with the combined energy of creation and infinity, a permanent testament to their fused power. Surzex and Azazel had agreed to quarantine the area, classifying it as a territory of the Twin Dragons, a title that was beginning to circulate in the highest echelons of the supernatural world. It was a place for study, a place of wonder, and a place no one dared to enter without permission. Naruto and Ophis had spent a few more days in the underworld, sharing information with a now deeply concerned leadership. Azazel's discovery of the texts about Shunya had changed everything. This was no longer a political struggle or a territorial dispute. This was a war for existence itself, and Naruto, as the reincarnation or successor of Ryujin, was its unwilling general. Ophis, whose nature was so antithetical to the Void Sovereign's hungry nothingness, was his undisputed second-in-command. It was during a quiet moment, as they sat on a balcony overlooking the crimson city of Lilith, that the summons came. It wasn't a formal message or a telepathic call. It was a feeling. A deep, sickening lurch in Naruto's gut that was tied to the very soil of his home world. He felt a wave of death, of despair, of desperate, futile struggle. He felt the life force of thousands of people he knew, people he had grown up with, flickering like candles in a hurricane. "What is it?" Ophis asked, noticing the sudden tension in his body. The golden light of his aura, usually so calm, was beginning to roil. "War," Naruto answered, his voice a low growl. He stood up, his gaze turned towards a direction no one else could see, back across the dimensions. "A big one. They've started it without me." He closed his eyes, his consciousness soaring across the dimensional divide. He saw it all in a horrifying, instantaneous flash, a vast desert battlefield, two massive armies clashing. On one side, the collected forces of all the great shinobi villages, a desperate alliance of former enemies. On the other, a grotesque army of white, plant-like humanoids, and worse, the reanimated bodies of legendary shinobi, their faces pale and cracked, their eyes holding the black scara of the impure world resurrection. And leading them, a figure in a white mask and a man with flowing black hair, his eyes burning with the cursed red of the Sharingan. Obito and Madara Uchiha. The sheer scale of the slaughter was breathtaking. Shinobi were dying by the hundreds, cut down by their own former heroes or overwhelmed by the sheer, unending numbers of the white Zetsu. The rage that followed was cold and absolute. It was the fury of a god seeing his garden infested with pests. "I have to go back," he said, his golden eyes snapping open. They were no longer soft, they were burning with a righteous, terrifying light. "We will go back," Ophis corrected, standing beside him. She placed her small hand on his arm. She didn't understand the intricacies of this war, or the emotional attachments Naruto had to these shinobi. But she understood one thing with perfect clarity: his home was being threatened. His noise was being silenced by another, far uglier noise. And that was unacceptable. Without another word to their hosts, Naruto wrapped them both in his spatial energy and they vanished from the underworld. They reappeared not in Konoha, but high in the stratosphere, thousands of feet above the main battlefield in the land of frost. Below them, the war stretched from horizon to horizon, a sprawling, chaotic tapestry of flashing jutsu, clashing steel, and dying screams. The air was thick with the stench of blood and burning earth. Naruto's gaze took it all in, his divine senses cataloging every detail. He saw Gaara, his former rival, commanding the lines, his sand a desperate shield against an unending tide. He saw Kakashi, leading a squadron in a frantic skirmish against the reanimated 7 swordsmen of the mist. He saw Tsunade, her strength monstrous, shattering Zetsu with single blows, but for every one she destroyed, 10 more took its place. He saw the despair, the exhaustion, the slow, grinding certainty of defeat in their eyes. The old Naruto would have charged in, Rasengan blazing, a one-man army. The new Naruto knew that was inefficient. He was not a soldier anymore. He was a force of nature. He would not just join this battle. He would end it. Ophis, he said, his voice calm but resonating with power that made the very air around them vibrate. I'm going to need you to anchor me. What I'm about to do will require a great deal of focus. Ophis nodded, her expression serious. She understood. He was about to perform an act of creation on a scale that would make their forest in the underworld look like a potted plant. She placed her hands on his back, her power of infinity flowing into him, not to add to his strength, but to act as a metaphysical stabilizer, a conceptual bedrock that would keep his immense power from running wild. Naruto closed his eyes and spread his arms wide. He reached down, not with chakra, but with his will. He touched the life force of the entire continent, the vast, sleeping energy of the planet itself. He felt the network of nature energy, the same power the toads had taught him to gather as a sage, but now he wasn't just borrowing it, he was commanding it. He took a deep breath and then he pushed. Down on the battlefield, a shinobi from the Cloud Village screamed as a reanimated Kinkaku, wreathed in the Kyuubi's cloak, slammed him into the ground. As the Golden Brother raised a clawed hand for the final blow, a light appeared. It wasn't a flash. It was a gentle, pervasive glow that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. The ground beneath the allied shinobi began to shimmer with a soft, golden light. A wave of warmth and vitality, so potent it felt like basking in the summer sun, washed over the entire army. The Cloud Nin's shattered bones knitted themselves back together in an instant. His depleted chakra reserves surged, filling to the brim. The exhaustion that had been dragging him down for hours vanished, replaced by a vibrant, energetic vigor. He looked at his hands, then at the hundreds of thousands of his comrades, who were all experiencing the same miraculous recovery. The reanimated shinobi, however, were unaffected. The golden energy, so pure and life-giving, was anathema to their dead, borrowed forms. It didn't harm them, but it didn't help them either. High above, Naruto wasn't finished. That will keep them fighting, he murmured. Now for the shield. He focused his will again. The golden energy erupting from the ground intensified. It flowed upwards, coalescing into a vast, semi-translucent dome of shimmering golden light that stretched across the entire battlefield, covering the allied shinobi forces like a protective shell. Madara Uchiha, who had been observing the battle with a bored, arrogant detachment from a high cliff, suddenly sat up straight, his Rinnegan eyes widening in shock. He had just launched a volley of massive meteors towards the 4th Division, a show of force designed to shatter their morale completely. But as the first meteor entered the atmosphere, it struck the golden dome. It did not explode. It did not shatter the barrier. The moment the massive rock touched the golden light, its immense kinetic energy was instantly and completely nullified. Its downward momentum ceased. For a moment, the mountain-sized meteor just hung there, touching the dome, before slowly, gently, disintegrating into fine, harmless dust that scattered in the upper atmosphere. The second meteor met the same fate. What is this? Madara breathed, a flicker of genuine confusion on his face. This was not a known jutsu. This was not the power of any shinobi, living or dead. On the ground, the allied shinobi stared up at the golden sky shield in stunned silence. Then, a cheer erupted. It started with one man, then 100, then 100,000. It was a roar of renewed hope, a primal scream of defiance against the dying of the light. Naruto's work was still not done. He had healed them. He had protected them. Now, he would guide them. His voice, amplified by his power, rolled across the battlefield, not as a shout, but as a clear, calm thought that appeared in the mind of every single allied shinobi simultaneously. "I am Uzumaki Naruto," the voice declared, a beacon of calm in the storm. "The war is not over, but you are not alone. This barrier will protect you from large-scale attacks. The ground you stand on will heal your wounds and restore your strength. Do not despair. Do not falter. Fight for your homes. Fight for your comrades. Fight for the future. I will handle the leaders." The message was simple, direct, and electrifying. Their savior had returned. Having turned the tide for the army, Naruto turned his attention to the more specific threats. His gaze swept the battlefield, pinpointing the reanimated Kage. The second Tsuchikage, the third Raikage, the second Mizukage. Powerful, legendary figures who were wreaking havoc on the front lines. He vanished from the sky, Ophis with him. He reappeared directly in the path of the third Raikage, who was in the middle of a devastating charge, his body cloaked in lightning, his single finger extended in his infamous Hell Stab. An entire platoon of shinobi scrambled to get out of his way. Naruto simply stood there, his arms crossed. The Raikage, a puppet controlled by his resurrector, did not stop. He slammed into Naruto at full speed. The result was not an explosion, but a dull thud. The unstoppable spear had met the immovable object. The third Raikage's finger, a weapon that could pierce any defense, was pressed against Naruto's chest, but could not penetrate. The lightning cloak sputtered and died, short-circuited by Naruto's overwhelming life force. The reanimated Raikage looked down at his hand, then up at Naruto, a flicker of his own original consciousness momentarily overriding the control seal. Confusion, then awe, dawned in his dead eyes. "You have fulfilled your duty, Lord Raikage," Naruto said, his voice respectful. He placed a hand on the Raikage's shoulder. He didn't use a sealing tag. He didn't try to destroy the body. He simply spoke to the soul trapped within. He projected a feeling of peace, of gratitude for his service, of release. "Rest now. Your battle is over." The soul of the third Raikage, feeling this profound and gentle release, stopped fighting. It let go. The control seal, with no struggling will to suppress, became inert. The reanimated body crumbled to dust and ash, the soul within finally free to pass on. Naruto repeated the process across the battlefield. He appeared before Mu, the second Tsuchikage, as he was about to unleash a massive dust release. Naruto simply put a hand on his shoulder. "Your legacy is in good hands, Lord Tsuchikage. Anoki has become a fine leader. You can be proud." The soul of the particle-style user found peace and vanished. He pacified the second Mizukage by complementing his clam's genjutsu, treating the legendary figure not as a weapon, but as the person he once was. In minutes, the most powerful reanimated threats on the field were gone, not defeated in battle, but respectfully decommissioned. Ophis watched it all, her expression unreadable. She was beginning to understand. Naruto's strength wasn't just his power, it was his empathy. He fought not just to destroy, but to understand. He saw the person behind the monster, the soul within the puppet. The Cow's Brigade was a collection of individuals united by greed and a desire for chaos. The allied shinobi forces, for all their flaws and rivalries, were bound by something more. They fought for each other. It was a noisier, more complex motivation, but Ophis was beginning to see that it was also stronger. Finally, with the minor threats cleared, Naruto turned his attention to the main stage. He teleported himself and Ophis to the cliff where Madara Uchiha stood, flanked by the masked Obito. They appeared without a sound, 10 feet away. Madara spun around, his Sharingan blazing, while Obito recoiled, his single eye widening in shock as he recognized Naruto. "You've grown, boy," Madara said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. His arrogance had returned, bolstered by a manic excitement. The power radiating from Naruto was unlike anything he had ever felt. It was greater than Hashirama's. Greater than the Ten Tails. This was the ultimate opponent he had dreamed of his entire life. You have surpassed the sage himself. This is a dance I have waited for. Naruto's golden eyes were cold. He looked at the legendary Uchiha, the man who had plunged the world into war for the sake of a cynical, twisted dream of peace. Madara Uchiha, Naruto said, his voice devoid of warmth. Your dream is a child's fantasy, born from an old man's refusal to accept the world as it is. You speak of peace through control, but true peace cannot be forced. It must be chosen. Words. Madara laughed, his body crackling with power. The rhetoric of the weak. True peace comes when all wills are subjugated to one. I will show you. I will crush your little army, capture the tailed beasts, and activate my infinite Tsukuyomi. Then you will see a world without pain, without loss. He lunged, not with a weapon, but with his very will, his Rinnegan flaring as he attempted to use a gravitational pull, Bansho Tenin. Naruto didn't move. The gravitational force washed over him and had no effect. He was the center of his own gravity now. Your world would be a lie, Naruto stated. A quiet, comfortable cage. It is no different from the silence of the grave. You would kill the world to save it from the trouble of living. He then turned his gaze to the masked man. To Obito. And you, Naruto said, his voice softening with a deep, profound sadness that was more cutting than any anger. You let him do this. You, who once had the same dream as me. You, who wanted to be Hokage. Look what you've become. A pawn in a dead man's game, all because you couldn't bear the pain of losing one person. Obito flinched as if struck. You know nothing of my pain, he snarled, his voice distorted by the mask. I know all about pain, Naruto replied, his voice resonating with the memory of his own lonely childhood, of Jiraiya's death, of watching Hinata fall. Pain is a part of life. It teaches us. It helps us grow. You didn't grow from your pain. You let it rot you from the inside out. Rin wouldn't have wanted this. The mention of her name was a physical blow. Obito staggered back, his hand flying to his mask, the carefully constructed walls around his heart beginning to crumble. Madara saw his pawn faltering and scoffed. Sentiment. It is a weakness. I will cut it from this world. He formed a hand sign, and a massive forest began to erupt from the barren cliffside, the trees rocketing outwards, their branches like spears aimed at Naruto. Deep forest emergence. It was Hashirama's signature technique, a jutsu of immense life. But it was a pale imitation of what Naruto could now do. Naruto looked at the forest of death rushing toward him. He raised one hand. You create a forest to kill, he said, his voice laced with disappointment. Allow me to show you the proper use of life. He clenched his fist. The entire forest that Madara had created, every tree, every branch, every leaf, froze in place. Then, it began to change. The dark, menacing wood turned a vibrant, healthy green. The spear-like branches softened, sprouting with beautiful, glowing flowers. In seconds, Madara's jutsu of death had been hijacked, tamed, and transformed into a beautiful, harmless garden. Madara stared, his jaw slack with disbelief. His greatest rival's ultimate power, which he had stolen and perfected, had been turned against him and made into a floral arrangement. It was the ultimate humiliation. My turn, Naruto said. He stomped his foot. The ground beneath Madara and Obito erupted. But it wasn't a tree. It was a single, colossal hand, made of pure, compressed golden energy. It shot upwards, not to crush them, but to hold them. It closed around them gently but with an inescapable firmness, lifting them high into the air. Naruto floated up to face them, his expression one of grim finality. This war is over. Your dream dies today, Madara. Madara struggled against the golden hand, but his power was useless. The hand was made of pure, conceptual life energy, and it was simply too dense, too powerful for his Rinnegan to affect. He was trapped, a god in a cage made of light. Naruto was about to dismantle Madara's reanimated body and deal with Obito when he felt it. A presence, slithering up from behind Madara. A being of pure, black will. Black Zetsu, the physical manifestation of Kaguya Otsutsuki's will, emerged from the ground, thinking all its enemies were distracted. Its goal was simple: stab Madara in the back, absorb the power of the Ten Tails, and revive its mother. It never got the chance. Before the Zetsu could even fully emerge, Ophis, who had been watching silently from the side, acted. She had been observing, analyzing. She had identified Black Zetsu as a parasite, an anomaly. And she had decided to remove it. She didn't move. She simply looked at it. A thread of her infinite power, thin as a spider's silk, lashed out and wrapped around Black Zetsu. It was not a physical attack. It was a conceptual one. She trapped it in a time loop. Black Zetsu froze, its arm outstretched to strike Madara. Then, its form flickered, and it was back where it started, just emerging from the ground. It tried to move again, and again, it was reset. It was trapped in the last 1/10 of a second of its existence, forced to repeat its final, failed action for an eternity. Utterly harmless. Utterly contained. A problem solved with the cold, brutal efficiency only she possessed. Naruto glanced at her and gave a small nod of thanks. He turned his attention back to the imprisoned Madara, a being now truly without hope or allies. The Great War, the conflict that was supposed to decide the fate of the world, had been decided in a matter of minutes. Not by armies, but by the will of a single golden dragon and his silent, infinite mate. Chapter 7, A Cage of Silent Stars. Madara Uchiha, the legendary ghost of the Uchiha clan, hung suspended in the sky, cradled in a colossal hand of golden light. He was a being who had fought a god of shinobi to a standstill, who had mastered the Rinnegan, and who had orchestrated a world war from beyond the grave. Now, he was utterly, completely helpless. His struggles were futile, his jutsu useless against a power that operated on a different plane of reality. He could only watch as the boy he had dismissed, the Jinchuriki, floated before him, his golden eyes filled not with triumph, but with a profound, weary finality. Below them, the war had ground to a halt. The allied shinobi forces, healed and protected by Naruto's power, had systematically dismantled the White Zetsu army with renewed vigor. With the reanimated Kage pacified and the Zetsu numbers dwindling, the outcome was no longer in question. The shinobi now stood in silent, awestruck battalions, their faces turned to the sky, watching the drama of gods unfold. "It's over, Madara," Naruto said, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "Your plan has failed. The infinite Tsukimi will not be cast. Black Zetsu is contained." He glanced at the spot where the black entity was trapped, flickering in its eternal, 1-second loop, an almost comical sight if not for the sheer conceptual horror of its prison. "There is nothing left for you." Madara let out a bitter, choked laugh. "So this is how it ends. Not with a bang, not with the salvation of the world, but with the appearance of a true god who renders it all meaningless." He looked at Naruto, his Sharingan swirling, a manic gleam of despair in his eyes. "Tell me, God, what will you do now? Will you rule them? Will you force your own brand of peace upon them? How are you any different from me?" "The difference," Naruto said, his voice soft but unyielding, "is that I won't. I will give them the chance to find peace for themselves. I will protect their freedom to choose, even if they choose foolishly. That is the meaning of being free." He raised a hand, preparing to dismantle Madara's reanimated body, to finally release his tainted soul. But as he did, he felt a surge. A grotesque, sickening pulse of power from within Madara's trapped form. Obito, still held in the golden hand beside Madara, began to convulse. His body was being forcibly torn apart and absorbed, not by Naruto, but by Madara himself. The reanimation jutsu was being twisted, warped. "If I cannot have my world," Madara roared, his voice distorting, then no one will. Black Zetsu, even trapped in its loop, had been a key. A key to unlocking the final seal on the Geto Mazo statue, and Madara, in his desperation, was using his own reanimated body as a catalyst to force the process. He was forcibly absorbing the sliver of the Ten Tails power from Obito, attempting to become the Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails in his incomplete, reanimated state. It was an act of pure, suicidal spite. The Geto Mazo, which had been sealed far from the battlefield, was summoned, tearing through space to appear behind Madara. The remaining tailed beasts, sealed within it, howled. A monstrous, chaotic chakra, dark and terrifyingly powerful, erupted from Madara. The golden hand that held him began to crack under the sheer, raw pressure of the Ten Tails' nascent form. He's becoming the Ten Tails Jinchuriki. Kakashi shouted from the ground, his voice laced with panic. But the transformation wasn't completing. It was unstable. Madara was a reanimated corpse, not a living vessel. The power was too much. His body began to swell, to bloat, to become a grotesque, pulsating mass of white flesh and screaming faces. And then, from the heart of that grotesque mass, a third eye tore open on Madara's forehead. It was not the familiar red of the Sharingan. It was a violet, rippled Rinnegan, but with 9 Tomo marks, the Rinne Sharingan. A new presence, ancient, feminine, and utterly alien, hijacked the process. It wasn't Madara's will anymore. The grotesque chrysalis of flesh cracked open, not revealing the Sage of Six Paths form Madara had coveted, but something else. A woman emerged, floating in the air. She was tall, regal, with impossibly long, white hair that flowed around her like a cloak. She wore a high-collared, white kimono, and from her head sprouted 2 horn-like protrusions. Her face was beautiful but utterly devoid of emotion, her eyes a pale, blank lavender, the Byakugan. And on her forehead, the vertical, red Rinne Sharingan pulsed with a terrifying light. This was not a shinobi. This was not a human. This was a being from another world. This was Kaguya Otsutsuki, the rabbit goddess, the progenitor of chakra. The moment she appeared, the entire world changed. The gravity of the planet tripled for a heart-stopping second, slamming shinobi to their knees, before snapping back to normal. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a chakra so dense and so overwhelmingly powerful that it made the Kyuubi feel like a house cat. Kaguya looked around, her Byakugan eyes taking in the scene. She saw the armies, the broken landscape, and the 2 beings floating before her, Naruto, a radiant sun of golden energy, and Ophis, a perfect void of black infinity. Her blank expression flickered with confusion, then rage. Hagoromo. Hamura, she whispered, her voice like the rustling of ancient paper. She was mistaking Naruto and Ophis for her own sons, the ones who had sealed her away eons ago. No, you are not them. But you carry a similar, detestable power. This world is my nursery. My chakra. You will not steal it from me again. Before Naruto could even respond, she acted. With a flick of her wrist, the entire world dissolved. One moment, they were in the sky above the land of frost. The next, they were in a new dimension. They were floating above a sea of boiling lava, under a sky of roiling black clouds. Volcanoes erupted in the distance, spewing fire and ash. The heat was so intense it should have incinerated them instantly. Naruto immediately erected a golden shield around himself and Ophis, protecting them from the hellish environment. But he noticed something else. Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi, Team 7, had been pulled along with them, caught in the wake of the dimensional shift. He quickly expanded his shield to include them, saving them from a fiery death. Naruto. What's going on? Where are we? Sakura shouted, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at the lava sea below. One of her personal dimensions, Naruto answered grimly. He looked at Kaguya, who floated serenely in the blistering heat. She can manipulate reality. This is her territory. She is a parasite, Ophis stated, her gaze fixed on Kaguya. She infests worlds and drains them of life. A different kind of hunger. Kaguya's gaze hardened. You dare judge me? I gave this world chakra. I gave it life. It is mine to harvest. She raised a hand, and the sleeve of her robe slid back, revealing a palm from which a bone protruded. All-killing ash bones. She fired the bone spike directly at Naruto. It was not just a projectile. It was a jutsu that, on contact, caused the target to disintegrate on a molecular level, crumbling to dust with no hope of regeneration. It was the ultimate killing technique. The bone spike flew with impossible speed. Naruto didn't have time to dodge. It struck him square in the chest. Sasuke's eyes widened in horror. Naruto. The bone hit, and crumbled to dust. Naruto stood there, a hole in his white robes, but his chest was completely unharmed. He looked down at the spot, then back at Kaguya, an eyebrow raised. That's a neat trick, he said. Kaguya stared, her eternal composure finally cracking. Impossible. Nothing survived the all-killing ash bones. Nothing. My body is not merely regenerating, Naruto explained, as if sensing her confusion. It is in a constant state of being created. You cannot destroy something that is being willed into existence from a higher conceptual level. It's like trying to punch a hole in the ocean. The water just flows back in. Kaguya's rage intensified. If she couldn't erase him, she would crush him. She waved her hand, and the dimension shifted again. They were no longer in the lava world. Now, they stood on a vast, frozen plain under a pale, white sun. An Arctic world of ice and snow. The sudden, extreme drop in temperature was another attempt to kill them, but Naruto's shield held firm. This is getting tedious, Naruto said. He could play this game of dimension hopping, but it was inefficient. He needed to end this. Sasuke, I need a distraction. Sasuke, who had been watching the exchange of godlike power with a mixture of frustration and awe, nodded, his rinnegan swirling. He understood his role. He wasn't the main player here, but he could still be a factor. He used his Ameno Jikara, instantly swapping places with one of the ice pillars near Kaguya, and unleashed a full-powered Chidori. Take this. Kaguya turned, her expression one of annoyance, and simply absorbed the lightning attack into her hand. But the distraction had been enough. Ophis, now. Naruto commanded. Naruto focused his will, not on Kaguya, but on the dimension itself. He was a dragon god of creation. She could create dimensions, but he could create in them. He reached out and seized the very fabric of Kaguya's ice world. At the same time, Ophis acted. She didn't attack. She projected her power of infinity, not as a weapon, but as a concept. She targeted the spatial coordinates of Kaguya's dimension, wrapping them in an infinite loop. Kaguya felt it immediately. Her connection to her own dimension, her ability to shift them at will, was suddenly locked. She was trapped in her own ice world. She tried to shift them to her desert dimension, but nothing happened. It was like trying to turn a page that had been glued shut. What have you done? She shrieked, her voice losing its divine calm for the first time. I've taken away your favorite toy, Naruto said. He was now actively wrestling with her for control of the dimension, his golden aura pushing back against her white chakra. The ice beneath their feet began to melt, replaced by green grass. The pale white sun overhead began to shine with a warm, golden light. He was overriding her reality with his own. Kaguya, panicking, opened a portal, not to another of her dimensions, but to the normal world, intending to escape. But Naruto was ready. He bent space, twisting the portal's destination. Instead of the shinobi world, it now opened directly in front of Sasuke. Now, Sasuke! Naruto yelled. Sasuke didn't hesitate. He and Naruto had spent enough time together as Team 7 to act on instinct. He thrust his hand forward, his rinnegan glowing. Chibaku Tensei. But this was not the standard version. Fueled by a sliver of power Naruto had channeled into him, Sasuke didn't create a black sphere. He targeted Kaguya herself as the gravitational core. The ice, the land, the very substance of the dimension began to fly towards her, encasing her in a prison of her own making. No! Kaguya screamed, struggling against the pull, but it was too late. She was sealed, trapped within a newly formed moon in the center of her own dimension. It was a perfect echo of how her sons had defeated her. But Naruto knew it wasn't enough. A seal could be broken. A prison could be escaped. He had seen her power, her obsession. She was as lonely and paranoid as he had once been, but magnified by millennia and godhood. She didn't need a prison. She needed peace. He floated towards the newly formed moon, Ophis at his side. He placed his hand on its surface. She is a parasite, but even parasites can be pitted, he said softly. He looked at Ophis. A prison isn't a permanent solution. But what if we give her exactly what she wants? Ophis tilted her head, understanding dawning in her black eyes. Isolation. A world of her own. A true silence. Exactly, Naruto said. He closed his eyes, and his power of creation flowed into the moon. He didn't reinforce the seal. He transformed it. Inside the Chibaku Tensei, Kaguya's consciousness stirred. The crushing rock and ice around her dissolved. She found herself standing not in a prison, but on a green hill, under a warm sun. Before her stretched a world of breathtaking beauty. It was a single, small planet, but it was perfect. It had mountains, rivers, oceans, and forests teeming with life. There were animals, birds, fish, but there were no humans. No one to steal her chakra. No one to defy her. No one to betray her. It was a world of pure, natural life, all for her. Her nursery, perfect and unspoiled. She looked up at the sky and saw no other stars, no other worlds. Only a beautiful, shimmering barrier of iridescent light. She was utterly, completely alone. And for the first time in millennia, she felt a sense of peace. Outside. Naruto and Ophis worked together. Naruto had created the world, a perfect gift, a gilded cage. Now, Ophis would lock the door and throw away the key. She pressed her hand against the moon beside Naruto's. Her power of infinity flowed out, not to create a loop, but to create a boundary. She wrapped the entire pocket dimension Kaguya now inhabited in a shell of absolute, conceptual spacetime. She disconnected it from the rest of the multiverse. It was no longer adjacent to any other reality. It was an island, floating in a sea of non-existence, unreachable by any known form of travel or dimensional sight. A cage of silent stars, Ophis whispered, naming their creation. A perfect prison, a perfect sanctuary. Kaguya had been given the eternal, peaceful isolation she craved, but was now utterly incapable of ever threatening anyone again. Their task was done. But the act of such immense, reality-bending power had a price. The combined force of Kaguya's dimensional shifts, their battle, and the final, massive act of creating and sealing an entire dimension caused a cataclysmic backlash. A soundless tremor ran through the fabric of reality. The tiny, hairline crack in the sky above Konoha, the one they had seen days ago, suddenly fractured. It spiderwebbed across the heavens, the slivers of hungry nothingness spreading. In the underworld, in heaven, and in countless other dimensions, new void cracks appeared, shimmering with a dark, silent hunger. The prison holding the void sovereign, Shunya, had been weakened. Their solution to one god-level threat had inadvertently loosened the chains on an even greater one. Naruto and Ophis felt the shift immediately. They had won the battle. They had won the war. But in doing so, they had just announced their presence to the greatest enemy of all, and rung the opening bell for a much larger, more terrifying conflict. With a final thought, Naruto collapsed the now empty ice dimension, pulling himself, Ophis, and the rest of Team 7 back to their home world. They landed softly on the silent battlefield, the war finally, truly over. The world was safe. But as Naruto looked up at the fractured evening sky, he knew their work was just beginning. Chapter 8, The Oath of the Twin Dragons. The end of the Fourth Great Ninja War was not marked by triumphant parades or grand speeches. It was marked by a profound, collective silence. An army of shinobi stood in a broken land, under a fractured sky, and watched as their savior, Uzumaki Naruto, returned from a battle that had taken place in a different reality altogether. He had left as a boy of myth and returned as a god of fact. The world had been saved. Kaguya was gone. Madara was a pile of dust. Obito, stripped of the ten tails and left broken but alive, had been taken into custody by a grim-faced Kakashi, his fate to be decided later. The reanimated shinobi had all been released. The war was over. In the days that followed, a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere settled over the elemental nations. Naruto did not claim a throne. He did not issue edicts. He simply was. He spent his time aiding in the reconstruction, not with grand gestures, but with small, meaningful acts. He would walk through the makeshift medical tents, his mere presence a soothing balm, his touch accelerating the healing of the most grievous wounds. He would find a crew of shinobi struggling to raise a support beam for a new building and lighten its weight with a thought, allowing them to set it in place with ease. He was everywhere and nowhere, a benevolent force of nature. He spoke with the Kage, not as a superior, but as a concerned peer, his wisdom and cosmic perspective cutting through decades of political friction. He offered solutions to border disputes and resource shortages that were so simple and elegant they left seasoned diplomats speechless. He was not a ruler, he was a gardener, tending to his world, helping it heal. And at his side, always, was Ophis. She was a silent shadow in his golden light. The shinobi were terrified of her, this small, gothic girl whose eyes held the cold of the void. But they saw that Naruto was not. He treated her with a gentle, easy familiarity that was utterly baffling. He would talk to her as they walked, pointing out things he found interesting, and she would listen, her expressionless face betraying nothing, but her presence a constant affirmation. Her allies in the Chaos Brigade had tried to contact her. Vala Lucifer, his pride still smarting, had attempted to approach, as had others. Ophis had ignored them all. Their noise was chaotic, selfish, and boring. Naruto's noise was different. It was purposeful. It was warm. It was directed towards an end she was beginning to understand, the protection of things he cared about. It was a concept she was still processing. One afternoon, they sat atop the newly repaired Hokage monument, watching the sunset paint the recovering village in hues of orange and pink. Konoha was bustling with life, the sounds of hammers and laughter drifting up to them. "You are fixing their noise," Ophis stated, her gaze on the village below. "I'm helping them fix it themselves," Naruto corrected gently. "There's a difference." He turned to her, a soft smile on his face. "Have you ever had ramen?" Ophis tilted her head. "It is a food composed of noodles, broth, and various toppings. Nutritional value is moderate. I have analyzed its composition. I have not consumed it." Naruto's smile widened. "Analysis isn't the same as experiencing. Come on." He didn't teleport them. He led her down from the monument, walking through the streets of the village. People parted before them, bowing their heads in reverence and fear. Naruto returned their greetings with a friendly nod, his easy charisma a stark contrast to Ophis's unnerving stillness. They arrived at the spot where Ichiraka Ramen had once stood. It was gone, vaporized in Pain's assault. In its place, a new, slightly larger stand was nearing completion, Tucci and I am directing the construction with beaming faces. When they saw Naruto, they stopped and bowed deeply. "Naruto-sama," Tucci said, his voice thick with emotion. "You honor us." None of that Sama stuff, old man, Naruto laughed, the sound warm and familiar. It's just me. He gestured to the new stand. Looks good. When's the grand reopening? Soon, thanks to you, Ayam said, her eyes shining with gratitude. But for you, we are always open. She led them to a temporary setup, a simple stove and a couple of stools. Naruto sat down with a contented sigh. He patted the stool next to him. Ophis observed it for a moment before gracefully hopping onto it, her feet dangling inches from the ground. 2 bowls of miso pork ramen, extra large, please, Naruto ordered. Ayam blinked. 2. Yep. My treat, Naruto said, glancing at Ophis. A few minutes later, 2 steaming, fragrant bowls were placed before them. Naruto picked up his chopsticks with practiced ease. Alright, dig in. It's the best food in the world. Ophis stared at the bowl. It was a chaotic mess of colors, textures, and smells. It was the epitome of worldly noise. She watched as Naruto took a large mouthful, a look of pure, unadulterated bliss on his face. Following his example, she picked up her own chopsticks, her movements precise and economical, and delicately lifted a few noodles to her mouth. She chewed slowly, her ancient mind analyzing the sensation. The saltiness of the broth. The chewiness of the noodles. The savory flavor of the pork. The slight crunch of the bamboo shoots. It was a complex cascade of sensory input. It was, not unpleasant. She took another bite. And another. Silently, methodically, she ate the entire bowl. When she was finished, she placed her chopsticks down neatly and looked at Naruto, who was just finishing his own. It was noisy, she said. Good noisy? He asked, a hopeful grin on his face. She considered this for a moment. Acceptable, she conceded. Naruto laughed, a real, hearty laugh that made several nearby shinobi jump. It was the most progress he'd gotten out of her in a week. He wasn't trying to change her. He wasn't pushing her to feel. He was simply sharing his world with her, piece by piece, letting her draw her own conclusions. He was including her. And Ophis, the eternal, solitary god of infinity, was finding that she didn't mind being included. The silence she had always craved, the absolute peace of the dimensional gap, was beginning to feel less like a goal and more like a memory. An empty one. The quiet she felt when she was near Naruto was different. It wasn't an absence of noise. It was an absence of threat. An absence of loneliness. It was the peaceful silence of sitting next to someone you trust completely, knowing you don't need to speak. They spent the next few weeks in a similar pattern. Naruto would show her some new piece of his world, the warmth of the sun on a lazy afternoon in the Nara clan's deer pasture, the complex beauty of a shogi game with Shikamaru, the fierce, competitive joy of a sparring match with Lee. He never explained why these things were important, he just let her observe, to be present. One evening, they stood on the shore of a quiet lake miles from the village, under a sky full of stars. The fractures from their battle with Kaguya were still there, faint, dark lines against the diamond dust of the galaxy, a constant reminder of the larger threat that loomed. The dimensional gap is empty, Ophis said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper in the night air. She was staring at her reflection in the dark water. I have observed it from here. It is silent now. The great red is gone. He fled when your power awakened. The noise was too definitive. Naruto turned to her, surprised. Then, you can go home. Your goal is achieved. Ophis continued to stare at her reflection. Yes. I can go home. She paused, and for the first time, her voice carried a trace of an emotion Naruto could identify, uncertainty. But the silence there is, cold. It is an empty silence. The quiet I feel when I am with you, is warm. She finally turned her head, her infinite black eyes meeting his glowing gold ones. The dimensional gap is empty, she repeated softly. With you, it is quiet. It was the simplest, most profound confession he had ever heard. It wasn't a declaration of love in the human sense, full of flowery words and grand promises. It was a statement of fact, a redefinition of her entire existence. He was no longer a noisy disruption. He had become her new definition of quiet. Her home was no longer a place, it was a person. Naruto felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with his own power. He, the boy who had been so desperately, painfully alone, had found a kindred spirit in the loneliest being in all of creation. They were two sides of the same coin, two halves of a whole. Creation and infinity. Life and eternity. Noise and silence. He reached out and gently took her small hand in his. Her skin was cool to the touch. Then stay, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't let himself feel since his awakening. Stay with me. We can make our own quiet. Ophis looked down at his hand holding hers. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Yes. That single word sealed it. Their bond, forged in battle and tempered in quiet understanding, was now formalized. But for beings like them, a human ceremony, a promise of words, was insufficient. There's had to be an oath written into the very fabric of reality. Naruto looked up at the fractured sky. The worlds are unstable, he said. The walls between dimensions are thin. Shunya is watching. We need a place of our own. A sanctuary. A home. He squeezed her hand. And we need to show them all who we are. Not just allies. Not just companions. But one. Ophis understood immediately. Their power, combined, could create anything. Naruto raised their joined hands to the sky. Ophis did the same. He closed his eyes and unleashed his power, not as a weapon, but as a foundation. A torrent of pure, golden creative energy shot into the sky, a pillar of light that pierced the heavens. It was the concept of home, of growth, of sanctuary. Ophis then added her own power. A stream of swirling, absolute blackness coiled around the golden pillar. It was not a destructive force. It was the concept of infinity, of permanence, of unbreachable boundaries. Gold and black. Creation and infinity. Life and eternity. The two powers intertwined, a divine helix ascending into the cosmos. They were not fighting. They were dancing. Weaving. Mating, in a way no mortal could ever comprehend. High in the atmosphere, the two powers coalesced. They began to fold space and time, pulling raw protomatter from the void, shaping a new reality. They were not building in a pre-existing space. They were creating the space itself. On the ground, every shinobi, every civilian in the elemental nations, looked up and saw it. They saw the twin pillars of gold and black light, a celestial spectacle that dwarfed any jutsu. They felt the sheer, unimaginable power, but it was not frightening. It was beautiful. It was hopeful. It felt like the dawn of a new age. In the underworld, Surzex and Ajuka watched the phenomenon on their sensors, their jaws slack. In heaven, Michael's seraphs fell to their knees in prayer. In his lonely fortress, Valor Lucifer watched the sky light up and felt a pang, not of envy, but of something that felt strangely like understanding. The union of Naruto and Ophis's power created a new, stable pocket dimension. It was a perfect fusion of their natures. It had the infinite, unbreachable piece of the dimensional gap, but it was filled with the vibrant, creative life force of Naruto. It was a world of impossible, beautiful landscapes, of silent, sun-drenched fields and forests that hummed with gentle life. It was a place of perfect quiet, of perfect peace. It was their home. A place only they could enter, anchored to their very souls. But the act of their divine union did more. It sent a definitive, unambiguous shockwave through the cosmos. It was a declaration. They were no longer two separate entities. In the eyes of the universe, they were a single, unified concept. A new, third heavenly dragon had been born, a pillar of reality that stood for both infinite creation and eternal life. The twin dragons of the seventh heaven. And their birth sent a beacon, a blinding flare of light and life and infinity, directly into the cold, hungry dark where the void sovereign waited. Shuanya, the silent hunger, had been watching, its influence seeping through the cracks in reality. It had seen the golden dragon, the heir of its ancient jailer. It had seen the infinite one, the anomaly. It had considered them separate, manageable threats. But now, they were one. A paradox of infinite life. An ideological and existential opponent of a magnitude it had not faced since the dawn of time. It finally had a clear, undeniable target. The game of subtlety was over. The time for heralds and whispers was coming to an end. Back on the lakeside, the pillars of light faded. Naruto and Ophis stood, their hands still joined, breathing in the air of their home world. The sky was still fractured, but a new, invisible star now hung in the heavens, the anchor point to their personal dimension. Naruto looked at Ophis, at the girl who held the universe in her eyes, and saw the faintest, most delicate trace of a new emotion there. Contentment. He pulled her into a gentle hug, and she did not resist. She felt small in his arms. Precious. Something to be protected. My mate, he whispered, the ancient draconic word feeling more right than any human term. My Naruto, she replied, her voice a soft murmur against his chest. For the first time in her eternal existence, Ophis smiled. A small, genuine, breathtaking smile. They had found their quiet. But they both knew that the silence would not last. The true war was about to begin. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.